Delivery drivers. Have you ever blacklisted a customer? My friend, who is a pizza guy, told me he asked his manager to ban a house because they always want him to wait until they eat the first slice, and then they complain the pizza isn't well made and ask for some discount or coupon, and they end up not paying their tip, acting all angry. Jerks. I delivered to the dorms when I was in college, back before credit cards could be used to pay for pizza. In the largest men's dorm, we had a war with some of the residents after they got angry when we wouldn't accept an expired coupon for a 14-pizza order. So they kept calling us up with ghost orders and making life real hell for us over the course of a few weeks. So we stopped delivering to anyone in that dorm. As we were the cheapest pizza in town, that didn't go over well with them. The RAs got every student in that dorm together and told them to knock it the frick off or get kicked out. So, we tried to deliver again and the same thing happened. So we banned the dorm forever. It was cool by me because those idiots would place between 5 to 20 pizza orders and tip $2. It was the mid-80s and there was no caller ID. Most of the students used the wall of payphones they had in the lobby, but some rooms had their own phone. Regardless, there was no way of us knowing who was calling. I was delivering for Godfathers in Memphis in 1988. We had both houses and areas that were no delivery. We had one area smack dab in the middle of our normal delivery zone that was blocked out. It was a low-income apartment complex. We got a new manager, and he was eager to up his numbers, so he quickly changed that area to being a legit delivery area. The first time he handed me an order for that complex, I explained that it was a really crappy complex and we didn't go there for a reason. He accused me of being racist and that I was too scared to deliver to a black part of town because I was white, and said that I'd have no problem going to a poor white part of town. That wasn't true. He just said to deliver it anyway and quit complaining. Okay, man. So I drove it out there and walked upstairs to the apartment door. I knocked, no answer. I look a bit closer and it's obviously a vacant apartment. So I head back to my car and I was sorting out my money bag and next order when I glanced up in the rear view mirror and I see 3 bad-looking dudes crossing the parking lot, heading right for my car. I notice one of them is carrying a weapon. Holy crap. I cranked up my crappy VW Rabbit, threw it in reverse, and hauled butt out of the parking lot. I got back to the shop and the new manager accused me of making it all up and said he didn't think I'd even attempted to deliver it. He says to go back out there, and I say no frickin' way, dude. So he insists, so I insist he comes with me, and he does agree. We drove out there, he carries the pizza up the stairs, realizes that it's a vacant apartment, and quickly gets back in the car. Sorry dude, you were right, it's a setup. We got back to the shop and he marked the whole area off limits again. Yep, sometimes new management discovers that these old rules are there for a reason. Also, at least your manager was not only able to put his money where his mouth was and come with you, but he actually admitted fault, so good for him. That's better than 98% of managers we hear about here. A lady on our delivery route was always just getting out of the shower when we arrived and kept accidentally dropping her towel. There wasn't a single driver in our shop who hadn't seen every disgusting fold and lump of that 300-pound acne-covered body. The manager finally warned her that if she did it again, she'd be banned. She, of course, did it again, and I like to think that the resultant loss of home-delivered pizza translated into a net benefit for her physical health, just as it had done for our mental health. I had a house who took the pizza, went inside, I'm assuming shook it violently, and then ran me down before I drove off demanding it be free since it was all messed up. I said there's no way that happened, but I'd be happy to take that pizza and get another. He demanded he keep that one and I get him another. I said, no way. I ended up taking the pizza back and I got chewed out because they thought I dropped it. Then a few weeks later, they pulled the same crap on my boss. People are scummy. There was an older man who suffered from dementia that would order 4 fountain drinks and nothing else from my shop and then would tip about $300 every time. After hearing about it a couple of times, I told my manager and we all agreed to get in contact with his family, let them know that we wouldn't take orders from him and that they'd have to take some measures to keep him from doing the same with other establishments. God only knows how much money that guy gave away. I used to deliver sandwiches for a shop. We had to blacklist this one lady who'd call up last minute and always demand 50 to 100 sandwiches for her meetings, and she wanted them delivered in 15 minutes. We explained to her over and over again that this wasn't how it worked, but she still demanded her order. So, when it showed up 45 minutes later than expected, she became a monster, causing a scene, not tipping, sending in complaints to the district manager. This happened so many times, and finally one day she called in an order for 200 sandwiches, wanting it in 15 minutes. I delivered the order myself, and she took the sandwiches from me for her meeting. I sat there and waited for her to sign the receipt, and waited, and waited. Turns out she took the sandwiches into her meeting and booked the heck out of there without signing. She then called her bank to cancel the charge on her card and called us in for fraud. She had the nerve to call up our district manager and said that we owed this to her since all of her orders were late. She was blacklisted after that, and my district manager finally apologized for not believing me on this story. Pharmaceutical reps are the worst. I used to be a delivery driver for Pizza Hut. I used to work the Sunday afternoon shifts, and I'd have the same man order a supreme pizza every week. I was always the one to deliver his order because most of the time I was the only driver on duty that time of day. Alan was a nice, quiet man who had a lovely front porch. One day I didn't take his delivery for some reason, and poor Marvin took the delivery instead on the day that Alan decided to open the door, stark undressed. Alan had wanted to show me, a small red-headed girl, the goods, not big black Marvin. Alan never ordered another delivery from us for some reason. I delivered pizza in New Jersey. I went on the porch to see a snarling Rottweiler behind the door. Not a big deal, it happens a fair bit. I'm a stranger, the dog is just being a dog, right? The lady pushes him back and we do the transaction, and as I'm turning to go, the lady said, "Oh my god, he's out!" The back door was swinging open and the dog was charging around the house, about to come onto the porch. I quickly opened the door to run inside, but the lady screamed, "No, the really bad one is inside!" And I saw a bigger Rottie just inside the hall. So I stuck myself between the screen door and the real door, and I'm trapped in an angry dog sandwich. The outside dog bites my calf because I can only close the screen door so much. There wasn't much damage, but I was bleeding. The manager goes to talk with the lady. It's like an eighth of a mile from the store, or that lazy jerk wouldn't have bothered, and the Rottweilers were penned up out back. As soon as the lady starts talking to him, another small mutt dog zips out the door and bites him on the hand. He made the call on no more pizza for that household. When I worked at a pizza place, we just had one person that we wouldn't deliver to because he had always refused to pay and he'd hassled the delivery guy, saying the pizza was cold or took too long, wasn't the right order, whatever. He probably got a couple of free pizzas at least before we stopped bothering sending to him anymore. We used to have people try to claim the pizza was cold even after we got bags with ceramic heat stones in them. A pizza could be a lot of things, but cold wasn't one of them. You could have a pizza in one of those bags for 2 hours, and the bottom of the box would be so hot you could barely touch it. It was a pain having to keep those bags plugged in and rotate them so you were always using a hot one, though. We had a guy and two girls order separately, then grab the pizzas and run. The girls had picked the food up and left while the guy was paying. After 30 seconds, the guy bolted. It was a $100 order. My manager, who's a frequent gym goer, leapt the counter and gave chase. The two girls had gotten into the car with the food, but when they saw my manager pounding towards them, they drove off, leaving the guy. My manager chased him for 3 blocks and was gaining on the guy when the girls pulled up and the guy got into the car. Unfortunately for them, all 3 of them went to school with the kitchen hand at our store, so we had their names, jobs, addresses, and Facebook accounts. We contacted them all on Facebook and we got them to pay for the pizzas the next morning under threat of contacting the police. We also put them on the no delivery list. You know, it's probably a good thing for these kids that their first step towards petty crime was such a harrowing failure of an ordeal. With any luck, it put them off trying this crap ever again. I worked at Papa John's, the only place on the no-delivery list were bounced checks. We had one driver get his knee bashed sideways with a baseball bat and money stolen. I delivered to the same place the next night. Our managers didn't care about getting robbed because the driver was only supposed to have $25 maximum on him at all times. So everything over that $25 the driver had to pay for. This driver, I think, had to pay around $125 after being brutally injured. We were told for this very reason that after every delivery, usually 2 to 3 houses, when you came back to the store, you put all of your money in your drop box. Obviously, if you got $60 cash on a delivery, the store wouldn't make you pay for that, but they had a record of how much the order was and how they paid. Those guys were evil. Oh my god, I'm on the no-delivery list of 2 restaurants because my roommate is a frickin' idiot and can't do math to save his life. He once sent a driver away after heated conversation with a minus 25-cent tip. Unfortunately, I was in the shower at the time. It wasn't until afterwards that he was explaining the situation to me that I realized what a moron he was. The bill came to $20.25. He gave the guy $20 and thought it was a good tip because we ordered 2 sandwiches that were basically $7 apiece and $1 for soda for a total of $15, so a $5 tip. In actuality, the sandwiches were $7.99 and the soda was $1.99, so that's $18 right there, and there was a $2.25 delivery fee, so $20.25. Unfortunately, the delivery guy spoke almost zero English, so all he could say was, "Not enough," to my roommate, and my roommate is an idiot who wouldn't read the damn receipt. He is no longer allowed to answer our door unsupervised. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We had quite a few blacklisted numbers and addresses. Mostly they were for people who wrote bad checks, or they'd constantly complain or return orders or even make threats. One address that was on the absolute edge of our delivery area, a business all by itself on the edge of town, it got blackballed because people from outside the delivery area would give that address and meet us there. A couple of bad neighborhoods, including one that was literally 6 dilapidated trailers in the middle of a field, with a 2-track going back to it, and nothing but smackheads with pit bulls and Rottweilers with no leashes, they were blacklisted too. Our greedy owner refused to develop such a list even after 2 of our drivers were mugged at the same house. They wouldn't let us avoid neighborhoods, no matter how unsafe, no matter what time of day. Okay, so we had a really nasty apartment complex in one area of Sacramento. Totally a no. One night a new guy took an order and actually accepted one from there. I was about to call back and say no, I was assistant manager at the time but running pizzas that day, when in come 2 cops to pick up their pizza. They listen in and offer to tag along. I was dumb and crazy then, so we made the pizza, and I loaded it into my little truck and drove out there. As soon as we pulled into the parking lot, the cop turns off all his lights and coasts into the spot next to mine. I walk up, start the spiel, and start listening to their story of this guy or that guy ordered it. I started to walk away, and one of the shady guys steps out of the bushes next to me where he had been hiding. Instantly, every light came on the cop car, flashes, both spotlights pointing right at me, with the cops getting out of the car. Quickly. The guy steps way back, I walk back to my car, and a couple of cops got an extra free pizza that night, and I got a great story. Worked at a Hungry Howie's Pizza in college. They're basically a cheap discount pizza chain. We had a few stores in a college town. Mine served the local college campus and the areas out west and south. These included the bad parts of town. We had a list of about 10 or so neighborhoods or streets we didn't deliver to because drivers had been robbed. One of which happened near a rather large government housing project. That never went over well when I had to explain it to people. They often cussed me out like it was my idea or called me a racist. We also refused to hire female drivers because of an incident before I was hired. A group of people made multiple fake calls throughout the night to different addresses until the female driver showed up. When she did, they kidnapped her for days. She was a victim to some truly heinous and unforgivable crimes. One of our drivers was kind of a crazy homeless guy who had some anger management issues. One time, a guy pulled a shotty on him while he was still in his car. He was having a bad day, so he just grabbed the barrel, pointed it forward, and floored the gas pedal. He also used to sunbathe in his white briefs in the nasty parking lot behind the store while laying out on old pizza boxes. Apparently, our entire complex is on the Do Not Deliver After Dark list at a local pizza place. That was encouraging to find out a week after moving in. Oh no, that's a fun one to break to your flatmate or partner. Guess what? We're the hottest spot for armed robbery in the county, and we're ineligible for services due to risk of injury to their personnel. Great job vetting the flat. In the late 90s, I was still living in Detroit and I was in between desk jobs, so I delivered pizza as a part-time gig. Detroit's neighborhoods have been rough for a few decades now, but the 90s seemed like they were on their own level. I won't say the specific neighborhood, but there were some really rough ones. This one house, though, this house was just in awful shape. I kind of figured this would be bad even as I was driving down the street to get there. Every other house literally was either burned out or very obviously abandoned. This one was just crappy looking, but I tried to be optimistic. I walked up to the door, the awning kind of drooping over my head, and I knocked. Almost instantly the door cracked open, and all I saw was a dark hand with what looked like a Glock. "Just leave the pizza and walk away." I complied, obviously, and told my manager that I wouldn't be delivering to that neighborhood anymore. I still stuck around with that job for another 6 months or so, but that was probably the only thing on that level that I've ever seen. Prior to my freshman year of college, 2002, I was delivering pizzas for Pizza Hut in a decent suburb outside of Cleveland. Now, I was kinda the typical green herb-using, partier, easygoing delivery guy. As a bit of background, one afternoon, my manager requested that I go to change several $100s for smaller bills for our register. As I was leaving the bank after getting change and getting into my car, I sense someone approach from behind and suspect they're going to ask me for a cig. Nope. Instead, it's a guy with pantyhose on his head and a knife who demands the money I have in my pocket, and my keys. I oblige, and he ultimately runs off and tosses my keys into the parking lot where I can see them. When I run into the bank, no one at all saw the incident, and wouldn't you know, when they pull the footage, there's sun glare in the exact spot on the window where my car was parked. The cops interrogate me and search the car, but seem to conclude that I was in fact telling the truth. My manager even vouched for me, saying how I was a good kid. Flash forward to about 10 years, and I was telling the story at a party, and bam, it hits me. My manager, who often dated unsavory characters, set up the whole thing. Considering I was robbed in front of a bank in broad daylight on the busiest street in my town, who the heck would know to rob me, especially since I hadn't put my car topper on at this point? I worked at a Little Caesars when I was a teenager. On a really snowy night, one of our drivers got into a car accident and sadly lost his life on his way to deliver the pizza. The customer called in a little while after we learned about the accident and absolutely lost it that his pizza hadn't been delivered. When the manager explained the situation, he stated he didn't give an F and wanted his pizza delivered for free. Needless to say, he got an earful from my manager and was put onto a no-serve list. Delivered pizza in high school living in New York. There were a couple of neighborhoods that we had to be escorted to by cops who were permanently stationed on the corners there. When you got to the building, we had to wait in the security booth that had bulletproof glass on it. This was all because some people would call delivery places and just rob the people of the money they'd carry, sometimes their cars as well. Our delivery store has a woman who used to come in every so often or order delivery and who didn't want black people to interact with her or her food at all. One of our drivers, a really nice old black guy, delivered to her and she simply slammed the door in his face. Another time, she walked out on a black cashier because she swapped places with the white driver who was originally taking her carry-out order. Finally, the manager put his foot down and told her not to come back or order from us ever again. I'm a former Domino's driver in a central Florida hood. The no-service lists were apartment complexes or streets where drivers had been robbed at weapon point. The downtown store had some places it would do in daylight but no service after dark. Screw that job. I worked as a delivery driver for Papa John's in high school. It was a nice weekend job, lots of nice people in my area. Naturally, there were a couple of idiots who we didn't like to serve and later added to the blacklist. One memorable house was this guy. This frickin' guy. He would order massive amounts of pizza, I'm talking anywhere from 7 to 20, and he'd pay with cash. So naturally, we'd call ahead of time to make sure it was a legit order and that we'd get paid for the pizza. He'd answer, tell us that it was all good and that he had the cash. It would always be the same order, X amount of thin crust pizzas with double anchovies and olives, extra cheese. I'd load up my car, drive over, and he'd never be there. Lights off and everything. Needless to say, we were all mad. This went on 3 times before we decided to add him to the blacklist. Then we'd get the same order to other houses. We'd get sketched out and not deliver to these houses. This happened over time, with many anchovy and olive orders made, and we added like 6 or 7 houses to the blacklist. Not the craziest story, but it's the only pizza blacklist story that I have. Pizza guy here. We don't have such a list, but we do remember which houses are regular jerks and which ones try to scam free pizza by complaining. Usually we just send another pizza, but we make the regular baseless complainers send the first one back. We've never had anything truly bad happen to us to make us stop sending to people altogether, but we've sent different drivers to some places, like if a coworker is being hit on and it makes them uncomfortable, we'll send someone else to the place. I'm sure if something bad enough happened, we'd cease delivering to that address though. I worked for a restaurant delivery service and we had 2 people that stick out in my mind. The first was this incredibly misogynistic and just awful insulting man. He'd call and order, being a sexist jerk the whole time. I don't give a frick about any goddamn specials, sugar chest. Just give me a rib plate. And then 10 minutes later he'd call back livid because his food wasn't there yet. Now listen here, you goddamn witch. I hated that man, and it was glorious when my boss snatched the phone from me mid-tirade and told the guy off. The second was one of the brothels. All the other places of ill repute were actually really nice and tipped well. This one in particular, though, they'd straight up snatch the food out of your hands and slam the door in your face, try to scam you out of money with these making change tricks. They complained about every order, screamed at all our drivers and order takers, and other stuff I'm sure I've forgotten. This was a long time ago. You'd think that given the nature of their business, they'd want to avoid the attention of the law, seeing as how they didn't even bother to conceal themselves under the name massage parlor, but openly flaunted that they were a straight-up place to get some. I'll never get that one. I imagine that's why they were spectacularly busted about 6 months after we quit delivering to them.
What was the biggest plot twist that happened in your life? My mom and I haven't really had a relationship for the past 5 years, for a lot of reasons. A couple of huge parts of that being my having left the religion that I was raised in and her having severe bipolar disorder that made her nearly impossible to deal with, which she refused to maintain treatment for. We have only spoken once in the last 5 years and it was awful. It was about 1.5 years ago. I drove down to California to visit her, 450 miles from me, and tried to patch things up. It ended up in a huge blowout fight and generally went as poorly as it possibly could. We never spoke again. One morning in May this year, my dad showed up at my door randomly. He and my mom had been divorced for many years and said we needed to talk. The apartment building my mom was living in had been set on fire and she didn't make it out. I still can't believe how hard it hit me. It changed me, maybe forever. The worst part was about 3 weeks ago when I was trying to remember the password to an old PayPal account. I had to have it reset and it was sent to an old email address that I haven't used in years. When I logged in, I found an email from her, sent just shortly before she died, apologizing and trying to reconnect and make amends. We had been out of contact for so long it was the last email address she had for me, but since I hadn't been using it for years, I didn't get her message until months after her death. That is exceedingly tragic, and I just feel like even if you don't see eye to eye, you need to have some method of communication and keep each other up to date on how to get to each other, at least if there is some kind of emergency in your lives. Wife was pregnant with our third and last planned child. We ended up in ER. She was miscarrying. The nurse cried because the fetus was not viable, so there was nothing to be done. It was horrible. One of the first times I felt completely helpless as an adult. Well, turns out the miscarry was actually her body making room for twins. The girls are now 5. Went from losing 1 to gaining 2. I apologize for poor phrasing. I typed it late on mobile. Let me clear up some things. The couple previous ultrasounds only showed a single baby. There was only a single heartbeat. The miscarry symptoms, horrible cramping, pressure, blood loss, was her body preparing for twins. We did not lose a baby. We were told we were losing it by doctors and had accepted that. The position of fetus B was in a dangerous location that would make overall development and C-section very dangerous. We were told the second time that we'd more than likely lose a baby. My wife Grace was put on respite and went on to carry the twins to full term. The unlikely twin is named Grace. Smiley face. That certainly started off rocky, but turned out all right in the end, thank goodness.
I was transferred to a division. Within a few months, my new supervisor and I hated each other. She was incompetent and I spoke up when she screwed up. She made my life hell and finally decided to give me a job that she thought would make me quit. I packed up my stuff in a box and asked for help moving to my new desk. She said she didn't have anyone to spare. I was carrying my box and didn't see a spill on the floor, ironically just outside her office. I slipped, fell, and broke my knee. I am on permanent disability, very legitimately received a huge settlement, lifetime health care, retired early. She was demoted, then fired partially due to the way she handled my case. This all happened a few years ago. Recently, when my husband and I were grocery shopping, I saw her in the store. I didn't want to see her, but my husband caught her eye and gave her a big thumbs up. She looked angry.
That sounds like a happy ending, but the fact that they're on disability for the rest of their life after breaking their knee and stuff, I would be utterly and unfathomably miserable if I could not move properly. I love being able to move. I like going out on sunny day strolls and riding my bike and stuff. The money might help, yeah, but I just appreciate my ability to move and stuff, personally.
I met a girl through Plenty of Fish and dated her for a year. She lived 6 minutes up the street from me, so we saw each other quite often. Both of us were quite introverted, so we mainly only hung out with each other. We both considered the relationship to be serious and exclusive. Anyway, right from the start of the relationship, I noticed that she would text this one guy pretty frequently. I asked her about him, and she told me that he was her tattoo artist. Just to be snoopy, I checked out the website of the place she got her tattoos done. Sure enough, there was a tattoo artist there with the same first name as the guy in her phone, but the last name was different. I asked her about it, and she quickly called me out on being paranoid, and how it was ridiculous to think that she would lie to me. I agreed, it was pretty paranoid of me. Maybe 5 months later into the relationship, I'm on Facebook and I decide to search the name of the guy in her phone. A profile comes up in the same small city we both live in, but there is no profile picture or anything. I decide to bring it up with her again because now there is 2 Facebook profiles, one who is actually a tattoo artist and one who has the same name that is in her phone. She freaks out on me for bringing it up again and tells me that I'm crazy. I agreed but just wanted a straight answer. She told me that I had nothing to be worried about. I apologized and we got over it. About a year into the relationship, I found her on Plenty of Fish. I would periodically go on there to see if she recreated her profile. We both deleted our profiles. I found a profile that I thought might be hers, but obviously no pictures. I catfished it and it turned out to be her. She was back on Plenty of Fish and looking for guys. I had all the evidence I needed and I was going to confront her with it the next day and break up with her. However, I thought that if I was going to break up with her, I was going to message this Facebook profile I had found that matched the name in her phone just out of curiosity. Plot twist. I message the guy. He gets back to me immediately. We converse and it turns out that he is her boyfriend. I had been her second boyfriend the entire time. She met him 2 months before she met me. She bounced back between me and him for an entire year. Neither me or him knew about each other. He saw my name in her phone once and she said that I was her tattoo artist. Every time I ever called her out, I was right. Every time she was gone mysteriously at night, she was with him. Every time she said she was hanging out with a friend of hers, she was with him. She doesn't actually have any friends. It was always him. Anyway, we both broke up with her the next morning and met the next day to have a beer. Haven't spoken with him since.
While I find behavior like this somewhat reprehensible, I must say it is rather impressive she kept this charade going for over a year. But I will also say that this person sounds like a naturally paranoid individual, but they were absolutely on point.
Bill was a self-made millionaire by the time he was 18 years old. That was in the mid-'80s. He has been one of my best and certainly most influential friends. 25 years ago, he married a girl that I did not like or trust. I told him as much, but he married her weird butt anyway. A few years ago, she ran off with a guy she met at a roller skating rink. He apparently wooed her with his zooming around or whatever, and Bill was single again. He met a girl and I insisted I meet her. Bill remembered that I had not approved of his ex. We met for lunch at one of those awful buffets. The girl was beautiful. She used English like a scalpel, working on a PhD. She was awesome. But I noticed little things about her. She had obviously been to finishing school. Then why did she have fingernail polish on her cuticles and a dress from a 1985 resale rack? There were just a lot of details that didn't add up, and Bill was getting ready to marry her. I told Bill that I thought she was hiding something, but I didn't care. This gal was high class and high bred. I told him she was great. Bill hadn't met her parents till the wedding. It was at their beach house in Destin. It turns out that my friend hadn't told his new bride of his formidable wealth, but she had been hiding the fact that her parents are legit billionaires. Bill deserves someone like her.
And I wish Bill all the happiness in the world. I have one that is straight out of a goddamn soap opera, and I'm fully ready to accept people calling bullcrap on it, but I'm gonna tell it anyway. I was very good friends with a guy in high school named John who was dating a lovely guy named Jenny, Polish or something. I can't recall, but that's sort of irrelevant, and was madly in love with him. He carried Jenny's picture around in his wallet, and every time they were together, they were super sweet. Really adorable couple. Then, one day, Jenny starts acting really strange and distant. Doesn't answer John's phone calls, doesn't spend time with us, the whole works. He flat out broke up with John and broke the poor guy's heart. I bought a spare t-shirt for a few days because my shoulder would be soaked from him crying on it. And then it got even worse. John called me one afternoon after school and begged me to come over because he needed a friend. When I got there, he told me that Jenny had been killed in a car accident and he was absolutely devastated all over again. I went with him to the funeral a few days later for moral support and he was just broken. Spent a couple of weeks just moping and being depressed, and here comes the plot twist. Are you ready for this crap? he gets a frickin' call from Johnny. He had a twin brother that we never knew about who was apparently a big troublemaker, and he had been sent off to boarding school. When he'd be home to visit us, they'd swap places for some reason that I never found out. Either simply for love or for some other reason I never knew, but they did. His twin was the one that had been avoiding John and broke up with him, and he had been drinking and doing illegal substances before he got into the accident that killed him. Johnny had been off at boarding school, so he wasn't able to make it back for the funeral, and when he did get home, he had to work up his nerve for a few days to tell his parents what they'd done, which led to them realizing that the child they thought was dead was actually alive, and vice versa, which led to some fun family complications, not the least of which being obituary retractions, headstone replacements, and lots of screaming, apparently. Meanwhile, John and him had a whirlwind romance afterwards in a giddy fit of reunited bliss, but it fizzled out after a month or so because John was furious after the reality sank in at what Janny had done without telling him and letting him be so miserable all that time. Not to mention letting him think that he died. I was the third-party observer in all this, but to this day, it's probably the most unbelievable thing that's ever happened in my life. Well, this just had everything. Illegal substances, alcohol, romance, identical twins. Yeah, they're right, it is straight out of a goddamn drama.
Told this before and will again. I was a little goth girl in high school and secretly had a mad crush on an upperclassman that was a wrestler and did cross country. My cousin, who was Little Miss Socialite, also had a crush on him and hit on him constantly. He and I were complete opposites. We rode the same bus and I was pretty sure I was invisible to him. So one day, his friends start picking on me. He gets up from the front of the bus, moves to where his buddies and I are sat, and sits down next to me, throws his arm around me, and they stop. This annoys the hell out of my cousin as he and I become friends, and he constantly ignores her advances. She later goes on to have me expelled by saying I had a bomb and was going to blow up the school because she didn't like this or that her BF and I were close friends. This ruined every friendship I had except the one with my and her crush. He and I remained friends even after he moved away, and then closer friends when he moved back. Today, he and I are going on 4 years together. We bought a house and car, had a daughter, and are working on plans to build our next and probably permanent home. 10 years later, that B-word is still greener than a Granny Smith apple.
Little did the cute AF goth girl's cousin know is that when she accused her of being a literal terrorist, it only made him want her more. Had a child with a woman I didn't love. Gave up my entire life to move states to try and give it a go. Became depressed and made the decision to move back home after realizing it just wasn't working. She filed for child support and thus began the gauntlet of her parents reminding me of how I abandoned my son and family and that I was a piece of crap. Ex wouldn't let me talk to my son unless I paid child support plus additional expenses, which I did because what did I know about being a father at 23? Still made monthly drives to see my son because I loved him. She became increasingly addicted to illegal substances and moved my son from state to state, turning to family members she could leech from. Parents told me I would never see my son again because I don't deserve him. I sued for sole custody, and I'm currently owed $60,000 in back child support and lawyer fees. She's been held in contempt 4 times, and we have a compliance hearing coming up on the 10th. She doesn't attempt to speak to my son, now 6. He wasn't yet 4 the last time they spoke, and current girlfriend of 5 years is referred to as Mom.
You know, good for this guy. He seems to have gone through a lot of personal suffering and well chuffed that he persevered and now happier than ever. Hell yeah. I worked in morning radio and I was also an accomplished bowler. One day I mentioned something about a high score I had and a listener called in and challenged me because he had just bowled a perfect game the week before. We worked out the details, and since we had the same first name, I said the loser has to legally change their name for 1 year to whatever the winner wants. We had an attorney ready to donate time for the paperwork. The guy refused to agree to those terms. He was up for anything but wouldn't do the legal name change. So we decided that the loser gets a tattoo of the winner's choosing. My idea was better, but I digress. So the challenge was set. 1 game the next day for the tattoo. Our studio was next to a bowling alley, so we were able to set it up so that we started in the studio in the first hour of the show, bowled in the second hour, and got the tattoo in the third hour. I designed my tattoo and got it to an artist. She made a stencil so she could tattoo fast and make for better radio. I threw the first 9 strikes in a row. He missed a spare in the first. I didn't even finish the game. I would have had somewhere between a 269 and a perfect game. He couldn't even score higher than 200. So we go and get the tattoo on this guy like 10 minutes after I embarrassed him on live radio. The tattoo is me writing Falcor.
I green screened myself in the Atreyu pose and photoshopped me into the actual movie poster. The artist had a perfect stencil made. The tattoo is finished and the detail is unbelievable. We all have a great laugh and I only see this guy one other time in my life. Plot twist. The last I heard, he was in jail for graping minus the G a 13-year-old. His second grape conviction. He couldn't legally change his name because he was a registered sex offender. So there is a child grapist in prison somewhere with a tattoo of me writing Falcor on his bicep. I'm the only person in the world with that story.
That may very well be true. You may be the only person in the world with that story, but I believe the world is an incredibly large place with some overlap and reoccurring events, so maybe not. When I was around 8, I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy and some severe heart issues. Everyone kind of just assumed I would die any day after that. Well, come 8 years later, I was still here and my doctor pretty much gave up on figuring out what is wrong with me, so my parents decided to get a second opinion. We went to Mayo Clinic and I was easily diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, something that is easily treated through exercise. In my case, post varies a lot and can be much more difficult to fight for others. The opposite of what my doctors told me to do. After that, I was just like, crap, now I have to plan my future. See, this is a real plot twist, because some people in this, I swear, have taken the idea and gone, oh, my life taking a very sudden and extreme change is a plot twist. No, this is a plot twist. A good one at that.
I will try to keep this as short as possible. My grandfather left my grandmother for another man after 35 years of marriage and the raising of 2 kids, a daughter, Mom, and a slightly mentally disabled son, Drunkle. It messed my grandmother up pretty bad. Fast forward 16 years, my mom dies from liver failure. Me and my kid sister are young and broke. Grandmother is old and broke. Grandfather pays for everything. Nobody says anything to him. No thanks, no condolences, nothing. I want to go see him and talk to him, thank him, and see how he's doing. I asked my grandmother where he lives on the grounds that he told me he had something important he needed to tell me. Pulled out of my butt, obviously, but grandmother bursts into tears and confesses that grandfather is not my mom's real father. She had a whirlwind romance with some traveling jackass con man who left her as soon as he could. Grandfather offered to marry grandmother and raise my mom as his own. Mom never knew. I was stunned. My grandmother was always really judgmental of other people and looked down on anyone else in this exact situation. She was sobbing at this point, and I snapped at her to stop because blood never really played all that heavily into what me and my sister considered family that she shouldn't consider it either. Anyway, that's how I found out one of my family's biggest secrets on accident and then promptly didn't give a crap. Neat plot twist, though.
People really enjoy the phrase whirlwind romance in this topic.
TLDR, big misunderstanding leads to big love. I'll share my grandma's, one of my favorites. As a young woman, she worked at a humble bakery in a small town in Australia. American soldiers were stationed in her town as they readied for deployment in the Pacific War of World War II. One day, a soldier from New York City came in and tried to order something not on the menu. His accent was very thick and she, being a Scottish immigrant, could not understand him. She was very embarrassed, but kept trying to assist him. After a couple minutes like this, the soldier got very impatient and started cussing and insulting my grandmother, the bakery, the town, etc. Well, my grandmother, a proud woman of small stature but surprising strength, came around the counter and punched that man hard in the chest. I'm told she broke one of his ribs, but that seems extreme. She definitely knocked him over. Fellow soldier lifted the stunned soldier off the ground and back to the base where they told their CO the story. The CO panicked about ruining relations with the town and pointed to the nearest man. He asked where he was from. Illinois, and hearing no action, sent him back to the bakery to apologize on behalf of the army. The man did a wonderful job and made a good impression and went back to that town after the war, and he married my grandma, and they lived happily ever after. They eventually moved back to the States, but she refused to ever visit New York City.
Ah, Americans, never will they understand not to mess with a bonny little Scottish lady. That's a sweet story, though. TLDR, thought I was starting a new life and I did, but not the one I thought I would. I moved from California to Chicago after a year of doing nothing after finishing school. Lived with a friend for a bit, then found an apartment in the city with some roommates. Got a perfect job in the field I went to school for. Almost 2 months to the day after I moved into the city, I went on a date that ended in me getting meningococcal meningitis. Spent 2 weeks in a coma, 2 months in a Chicago hospital, was sent back to California on a medical flight where I spent 5.5 more months in a hospital, lost 8 of my fingers and both of my legs, and now, 2.5 years later, I am still recovering with near constant setbacks. My God, went on a hot date. She presumably gave him the meningitis, not on purpose probably, but yeah, that's how you contract it, through saliva, spit, respiratory secretions and all that stuff, you know. And lost his legs, lost his fingers, just had to stay in a hospital for a long time. The coma? This is a man who has suffered. This is what I'm talking about when I say to people, yeah, you can be plucked from existence or anything can happen to you at any time. Gah!
I never really knew my father growing up. Sadly, he lived right next door for most of my adolescent life. There is exactly one time I remember him acknowledging me. I was standing on my front porch and he was going up the steps and into his. I was a kid. I waved, he waved back. That is the only contact I remember with my father as a child. Still though, I've always wondered about him. It hasn't really ever been about anger or anything, but more so why he chose not to want me. I've wondered about him for over 15 years. Way back in the day, they released a bike called the Sonic 6. It was a glorified Huffy with a big blue shield on the front and a gear stick in the dead center to change gears. I got it for my birthday, and of course, I was ecstatic. That thing was so cool. As luck would have it, as I was riding with a friend, a guy walking past me the opposite way cold-cocked me and knocked me straight off the bike. I got sucker punched like you wouldn't believe. The dude was huge, like obese huge. I was a kid. How powerful was I? The guy simply jumped on my brand new bike, told me to stay down and pedaled off. I chased him, but I didn't get very far. He was gone in a flash. 15 years later, I learned that my real father had paid that guy to beat me up and steal my bike as a revenge tactic against my mother. I mean, what kind of person does that? What kind of father does that? Sad, really. Another tad bit I wanted to throw in. I mentioned how the dude decked me and just rode off with the bike. Multiple sources had confirmed that he had actually paid the dude to beat the crap out of me. Like hit me while I'm about out for the count type of thing. The guy used to hang out with his friend right across the street. A few weeks after my bike was stolen, they started riding it up and down the street in front of me, except they had broken off the left-hand side of the handlebars. I remember the shield used to flap back and forth as they went flying down the street on it. How is that for some bullcrap?
What a despicable, vindictive individual to pay someone to beat up your son and steal his bike because you don't like the mom. What? That was their father's name? Stan Smith? Does he work for the CIA? Because that's the kind of thing that he would do. Well, maybe not actually, because Stan Smith would probably do it himself.
What's the most fitting case of vigilante justice you've ever heard of?
The man's name was Ken Rex McElroy. He terrorized a small town he lived in for years. He was accused of regularly stealing from his neighbors, stuff like livestock, gasoline, and antiques, robbery, harassing, assaulting, raping women, 2 as young as 12, destroying property, including burning down his wife's parents' house when she tried to leave him, assault, including shooting at least 2 people. He was charged with various crimes at least 3 times a year, but he had an incredible lawyer. Man was only ever charged with anything once. He used to intimidate witnesses against him by following them or parking outside their homes and watch them until they were too scared to testify against him. That one time he was charged, by the way, he shot a grocer in the neck with a scatter shooty bang bang. For that he was given a charge of 2nd-degree assault. Max 2-year sentence. But he appealed, of course, and got out on bail. So he goes into a bar and loudly threatens to murder said grocer, who survived the shooting to the neck, by the way. All that did was get his trial pushed back. Anywho, the town had a meeting. Then a big group of them went to the bar where Ken liked to drink and shot him in the goddamn head. I have actually been aware of the Kevin Rex McElroy story for a really long time. I watched Count Dankula's Mad Lads video on it, and honestly, a lot of his Mad Lads videos are so fun and interesting to watch. But this raises an interesting question of if there is a general menace to society going about doing things on repeat and the police, the justice system, what have you, aren't doing their job, should the general populace just put up with it? I mean, I should hope this isn't a controversial statement to make, but I really have zero respect, tolerance, or sympathy for rapists, murderers, or anything of that ilk, to be honest. And if an individual does come along and this person decides to fool around and find out and that person does something about it when no one else did, when the police didn't bother, when the justice system did not do what it's supposed to do, then frankly, life moves on.
Another case, Yaku Yadav. To quote the Wikipedia article, he was an Indian gangster, robber, home invader, kidnapper, serial rapist minus the G, extortionist and serial killer. He terrorized a poor slum to the point nearly every single woman in this community had been assaulted by him, and the daughters were just kept inside. He never got in trouble though because he bribed the police and only targeted Dalits. Basically, the untouchable caste in India. Seriously, the list of crimes is horrifying just skimming the article. It all came to a head when he turned his attention on a young woman who was studying to go to college and help the community. She stood up to him, and it ended with her threatening to blow up her house if they broke in. She called the police during the standoff, but they never came. That was the last straw for the neighbors. A mob formed and chased off his men by stoning them and then burning down his house, and he went to the police to get himself arrested for his own protection. When they took him to the court for trial, a mob was waiting and he actually threatened them. The police did nothing. More than that, one of his accomplices tried to pass him a knife, and the police only stepped in after the mob protested that. The next day, he was attacked and beaten, but he was rescued by the police. The police had no intention of actually punishing him and set up his bail hearing in another city. Hundreds of women marched from the slums armed with knives and chili powder, and well, I think I'll just quote the Wikipedia article. Yadav was then lynched by the mob of 200 to 400 women who showed up. He was stabbed at least 70 times and chili powder and stones were thrown in his face. The chili powder was also thrown into the faces of police officers who guarded him. The police officers, overwhelmed and terrified, fled immediately. One of his alleged victims also hacked off his penis. The lynching occurred in Nagpur District Court No. 7, on the marble floor of the courtroom. As he was being lynched, Yadav was horrified and shouted, "Forgive me, I won't do it again." The women passed their knives around and kept stabbing him. Each woman agreed to stab Yadav at least once. The mob continued attacking his corpse post-mortem. Yep, one of the most brutal lynchings ever. If you think it wasn't justified, I'll quote one more part from the Wikipedia article about his arrival at the court, which I think sums up his character quite well. Yadav walked in and was confident and unrepentant. At about 2:30 to 3 p.m. when Yadav appeared, he saw a woman he had assaulted. Yadav mocked her, called her a prostitute, and said he would do it to her again. The police laughed. Even when faced with a mob of his victims, he was still mocking them. This monster only felt remorse when he was literally about to die. And worse, the police laughed. If that mob had any lingering doubts, that moment definitely 100% made it clear that the police would not do anything to ever see Yadav face actual justice. 100% justified vigilante justice at its finest.
I'm not a man of faith. I have limited understanding of Hinduism, but I hope this man is suffering in Naraka for all eternity. And before you say Naraka is not a place of permanence for sinners, Madhvacharya has a different opinion on that. But here's the thing, it's not even just a problem with Aku Yadav himself. Screw that guy to the deepest depths of Naraka, or the police, or any of his associates. It's also the freaking caste system, which is surprisingly still pretty prevalent in their society today. I mean, this guy died in 2004. Grady Stiles Jr., aka Lobster Boy. He was an incredibly abusive husband and father. His daughter and her boyfriend actually pretended she was pregnant so they could get married and she could leave the house. The day before the wedding, he shot the boyfriend in the back 3 times, killing him. He actually confessed at the trial and was found guilty of 3rd-degree murder. However, the jail wasn't equipped to deal with his condition. He required a wheelchair due to his condition, and so he was instead sentenced to 15 years probation. He went back to being an abusive monster to his family, but it was even worse than before. He regularly reminded them he got away with murder once and he could do it again. Somehow, he convinced his first wife to remarry him during this time, which I'd say was the worst mistake mistake she ever made. In the end, his stepson and possibly his wife, though they all claim she had nothing to do with it, hired a fellow circus performer to murder him because his entire family believed he would murder her. I am not exaggerating. In interviews for the ID show I saw about the case, every family member made it clear that if he lived, he most likely would have killed her at some point. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. His death is one of the only murders outside of self-defense that I think is 100% justified, because the justice system already failed once. He might have been sentenced and found guilty, but they just put him on probation and house arrest. He literally got away with murder. If he'd just gone to jail the first time, then his family wouldn't be so screwed up now. I feel so bad for the stepson. He just wanted to protect his mom, and now he'll be in jail for the rest of his life. I think that's one of the worst parts of this case. His wife, stepson, and the hired killer all got longer sentences than Styles' probation. That man never spent a day in jail for cold-blooded murder, and yet his wife and stepson are likely to rot in there for trying to protect themselves from him.
I'm going to say this hits very close to home, so I'm going to make this brief. Lobster Boy, you're a despicable piece of crap. I'd call you something else, but I'm not allowed to, or else I'll get a smack on the bum-bum by the producers.
In my hometown, we had a drunk named T. He was in his 60s when this happened. T was slightly mentally handicapped and always walked home from the bar. One night, a group of teenagers grabbed him and beat him with a crowbar. Miraculously, T lived. Once the names got out of who did the crime, they all got out because they were 16 with probation. A group of guys, most of them over 6 foot and big, found the boys one by one and beat the living tar out of them. Then many of us in town donated and paid all T's medical bills off, and the money raised paid for him to live in a nice apartment the rest of his life.
So I understand to some degree why young children and teenagers are defended or protected from the consequences of their own actions by the law, but in this case, beating a man with a crowbar in the street is nothing but savagery. Screw them kids. Otherwise, though, I'm glad that this actually had a happy ending rather than just getting revenge, because revenge is cool. Revenge is rad. Don't let The Last of Us 2 tell you otherwise. Revenge is the sickest thing you can ever achieve. I'm joking. Hands up anybody who has heard of the Derlavanger Brigade. This was a Nazi unit recruited from convicts and guys released from asylums, and was so brutal that even other Nazis were disgusted by their atrocities. Their particular forte was massacring defenseless Slavic civilians, including murdering an entire kindergarten full of kids with bayonets. Evil Schweißkerl, to say the least. Their leader was a convicted rapist, sadist, and all-round unstable thug, Oskar Derlavanger. After the war, he was captured by the French and imprisoned, where he reportedly died of war wounds. What is more likely is that some payback happened. Remember how Derlavanger loved slaughtering Slavs? Derlavanger's guards happened to be Polish. I suspect this choice of guards was entirely deliberate. The result was that Derlavanger got beaten to death. I have nothing to say except they are an actual factual Nazi, and I don't really care or feel bad about anything that happens to them.
This is nowhere near the severity of most of these stories, but since it was close to home, when my daughter was in high school, she was tall and very attractive. She got a lot of attention from boys. One in particular was a jerk. Scott would not leave or take no for an answer. He would harass her because she had no interest in him. But she is very independent and never complained to us. She has always taken care of her own business. One day between classes, she stopped to get a drink of water. She stood there for a minute chatting with her friends, and Scott, showing off for his idiot pals, slid on his back behind my daughter so he could take a look up her dress. When my daughter looked down, Scott starts saying something like, "She's wearing pretty pink panties today." My daughter, a star on the soccer team, kicked Scott very hard in the ribs. That evening, I get a call from a man I have met, Scott's dad. They are in the ER. Scott has 2 broken ribs. I had no idea how this related to me. Then he told me that Scott told me that my daughter did this to him. I was expecting him to say he was going to sue me or something, but what he said was, I questioned Scott as to what he did to get kicked and how he was in such a position. I found out why your daughter kicked him, and she should have kicked him a few more times. I will have him apologize in writing, and furthermore, he will be grounded, I say grounded, until the end of school. But if you will, apologize to your daughter for me. Of course, my wife and I had a talk with her, relayed relayed the message and told her not to withhold good news. I have a lot of respect for a dad who did the right thing. I would bet that Scott turned out to be a better man. I certainly hope so as well that Scott turned out to be a better person. I know quite a few people who gave people, and even myself, a lot of crap in high school, and there'd be fights, insults would be tossed about and whatnot. And as a matter of fact, one of them that I know who I really, really disliked for a long time was a snotty little brat for most of his life, has actually grown up to be a fairly respectable individual. TLDR, father gets ultimate revenge on a pedophile who'd raped his son and got away with it in court. Sorry this is long, but it requires an intro of some sort. Years ago, I remember my family watching Phil Donahue. Y'all remember him, right? He kind of set the standard for talk shows and doing it in an investigative manner. But he had standards and wouldn't allow a Jerry Springer-like atmosphere. He'd present something or someone with controversial ideas or ideologies, or have people famous because this or that happened, or the subject of sensationalist news stories, human interest stories, all sorts of things that he thoroughly educated people about. Then he'd let his audience have the floor to ask questions freely. Anyway, one episode was a man about 40s or so. He'd just been, I think, either acquitted or done some time. I don't remember that part. But he had a son that was raped by a pedophile, and his son had been forced to testify in court at maybe age 9 or 10 and had to give extremely horrible and graphic testimony retelling of what the man had done to him, to the point he got sick on the stand and began vomiting. It was obviously horrendous to have been forced to watch, being the boy's father and mother. Well, the pedo got a not guilty verdict for a lack of physical evidence, regardless of what the little boy had said on the stand, something that happens all too often. So the father, who was a religious man, and I think they were from Texas, if I'm not mistaken, broke into the pedo's home and basically, I guess, held him at shooty bang bang point and told him, "You and I are going to pray." He told the pedophile, "Yes, you and I are going to pray. You are going to ask God for forgiveness for what you did to my son, and I am going to ask him for forgiveness for what I am about to do to you," and blew his brains out. I was not very old myself, maybe 12 when I saw that episode, and it totally galvanized me, and I loved that show till it went off the air. Hoo-wee!
You're gonna ask God for forgiveness, and I'm gonna ask him to forgive me for what I'm about to do to you.
That is some action movie stuff, man. Say what you want about Texas, say what you want about Texan boys, but, oh man, when they want revenge, they get it. In Brazil, I have a resident for 2+ years. It is a common practice to cut off the fingers and hands of captured thieves. A lot of the time they will also get beaten, almost to death with planks, like 2x4s, etc. It is also common for them to take a bullet to the hand, leg, etc. Rapists, thieves, and others who are shunned are usually subject to this kind of torture. Many times they will be dismembered with a machete or disemboweled as well. Beheadings are common, but they will usually take place after the victim has went through some significant torture. I have personally seen an alleged rapist from Sao Paulo get captured by the victim's brother. The rapist was about 20 or so. The girl he raped was about 11. They caught him, beat him in the street, then took him in an alley and hacked him up with a machete.
It really isn't hard, people. Just keep your dirty little hands to yourself.
I arrived to install some security and surveillance devices at a home in Phoenix several years ago and got the story straight from Brian Danielson. For those of you, like I was, that have no idea who this is, he goes by the stage name of Daniel Bryan and is/was a wrestler with the WWE and a one-time champion. I'll link the story, but it seems to have left out some of the best details that were relayed to me. Story goes that he and his wife arrive home. His wife goes to the carport door to enter the house and locks eyes with someone in the house. She sees the man and another drop whatever they are holding and bolt out of the back door towards the alley that runs behind the house. Brian takes off running after them, vaults the fence in the backyard and sees the two men running in the opposite direction away from the house. He decides to chase one guy over the other. Not sure what helped decide that. He chases the guy for about a block as the guy had a good lead on him. He catches the guy in the front of someone's house and puts him in a headlock and holds him while the homeowner that witnesses the struggle calls 911. The police were quick to arrive as another homeowner had already called about the suspicious vehicle parked at the end of the alley that happened to belong to the would-be burglars. Even more impressive about this is that Brian had very recently undergone neck surgery and was still capable of chasing down and subduing someone intent on getting away. Pro wrestling may be scripted, but this dude was obviously more than capable of handling himself. Also, he and his wife, Brie Bella, were some of the nicest and down-to-earth celebrities that I have met in my line of work.
It's not hard, people. Just keep your sticky little fingers to your goddamn self. But anyway, this actually reminds me of the story about Dolph Lundgren. Apparently, supposedly, his Marbella home was being robbed by 3 different people. And for those of you who don't know who Dolph Lundgren is, Rocky IV, Ivan Drago, man was built different. Like I said, I'm not a man of faith or anything like that, but if God is real, he built Dolph Lundgren with the good stuff. Some people out there are just built female dog made. I can't say that word, so female dog made, but Dolph Lundgren is built different. So these 3 masked robbers are apparently robbing his house in Marbella or something. They've tied up his wife, but then upon seeing a family portrait and seeing that Dolph Lundgren is in said family portrait, suddenly fear for their lives, because what if Dolph Lundgren comes home? Oh man, don't say that, screw this. And they leave. They just drop everything and just leave immediately. And honestly, I don't blame them.
A man's son was abducted by his karate teacher and raped over quite a long period of time. The police caught him, and as they were bringing him through the airport, his father pretended to be on a payphone. When the rapist and police walked by, he turned around and shot the rapist in the head, killing him instantly. This was all caught live on the news. The father wasn't charged with murder. He received 5 years probation. Gary frickin' Plauché. I love this story. It's a horrible story. It's a horrible story when you get down to it because of the victimization of his son. And you see, the context behind it is that the karate instructor of the son was kind of sort of friends with the family to some degree, like they were on good terms, and then suddenly the kidnapping happened. He flew across the freaking country and stuff to get away, I think. And I think to a very large degree, Gary felt responsible for not being able to protect his son from this guy. So he took actions into his own hands and killed him. But his son actually made a really nice post about his father not too long ago. I remember liking and retweeting it. It went something along the lines of, a lot of people know his father for this thing, obviously, but here's what I knew my father as. He was a kind, gentle man, and there was a nice picture of him painting Easter eggs and stuff, I think. Rest in power, Gary, that's all I gotta say. Rest in frickin' power. I mean, you just did what any decent father would do if they found out something like that had happened to their child.
Marvin Heemeyer, a.k.a. Killdozer.
I linked the wiki for him, but he is an absolute legend. I will summarize what he did and why he did that. Be careful what you read about him, because not all of it is true. So Marvin owned a muffler repair shop. The town wanted to build a concrete factory. They offered him a very low amount of money for his property. He denied. He basically asked for $1 million. His only source of income was the shop, and if he lost it, he would be out of a job. They end up not buying his shop and building it right outside of his shop. In fact, it blocked the way he got from his house to his shop. Cue zoning disputes. He petitioned to no avail to get them to move it. Multiple times, may I add. Many other things added to his rampage. He was fined for many things from the city council, likely as revenge. In fact, they expected him to pay $80,000 to connect his shop to a sewer line that was too far away. After the factory was built, it was impossible for him to even connect it. The rampage. You have to know he did not kill anyone besides himself. He actually stopped in front of the buildings that had people in them to let them out. Some people claimed that he fired at police, but it was known he fired at propane tanks. He had a list of buildings to destroy, and he destroyed all of them. There was a local Catholic church and names of people who wronged him. We don't know if he planned to kill these people or why the church was there. In fact,
fact, he believed God willed him to do what he did, and that was the reason he wasn't given a wife or children, so he could do it without remorse for them. His tank was a bulldozer that he suited with armor, a foot thick in some places. He used metal and concrete using his welding skills to hold it together. He made 2 shooting holes, and it was resistant to explosions and small arms fire. In the end, after it stopped moving, he deleted himself with a shot in the head. It was estimated he did around $10 million worth of damage. Now, if you believe what he did was wrong, that is your opinion. The police didn't help him. The city council didn't help him. The mayor didn't. No one did. He took it into his own hands, which is what vigilante justice is. Killdozer.
I freaking love the Killdozer story. Another Mad Lad story from Count Dankula that people must watch. It is insane. This man was pushed to the utter limits by crap-eating bureaucrats. God, I hate bureaucrats.
To anyone who has ordered a mail-order bride, what was it like and what happened? My friend Richard has a mail-order bride from the Philippines. He's a scruffy redneck long-haul trucker from West Virginia. She's tiny, slender, and 10 years his junior. At first, she cooked, cleaned, and kept his bed warm, but after a few years, she told him she wanted an education. He put in a ton of overtime and saved up enough to put her through college. She's a physician's assistant now and makes more money than he ever has. But she still makes him dinner and makes a point of always being waiting at the door when he gets back from a long haul. They've been together for 20 years now, and it's a joy to see them together. So on paper, I don't really like the idea of mail-order bride stuff. I don't really like the idea of any opening of a market that relies solely on a specific demographic, like women and stuff like that. Take the thing with surrogacy nowadays, where like a woman will have a baby for someone else to have a child, and I believe someone proposed that women in vegetative states should be used to be a repository for other people's children, and that just sounds like some horrible dystopian world. But I digress. This actually sounds like a nice, mutually beneficial relationship. He paid for her to come to the country and everything. He gives her a place to stay. He works, she cooks, she cleans. And then she said, I want an education. And he respects her enough that he's like, yes, I will pay for you to have an education. You can do what you want. That just sounds nice, not gonna lie. This doesn't sound bad at all. But I am 100% certain that things are gonna get messed up as I read through these stories. One of my uncles, who is Filipino, convinced one of his white co-workers to marry his 28-year-old niece, who was still living in the Philippines at the time. The guy was at least 20 years older than her. The relationship was really rocky the first 2 years. She hated him, basically, but she stuck with the relationship, got him to go to church, and they were more or less together. About 10 years into the marriage, the guy needed a kidney transplant. Months pass, he can't work anymore, and she's spending all her free time outside of working taking care of him at the hospital while he's waiting for a kidney. I visited one time while she was in the hospital, and she broke down telling my other relatives and me how she loved him and she didn't want to lose him. The doctors finally give him like less than 3 months to live if he doesn't get a kidney, and after a month and a half later, he got the kidney, recovered, and went back to work within a year's time. At a family get-together, he bragged to everyone, including me, about how amazing he feels and how much he thought he was dead and that he was blessed to have a new lease on life. Then, a few months later, I get a call from him saying that he's met someone online and he still considers me family. In shock, I tell him I'm busy and then called my aunt, who then explained to me he found a 21-year-old single Filipina mom from Cebu and already filed divorce papers against my uncle's niece, who was almost 40 at the time. I'm weirdly reminded of Captain Hook in the classic The Good Peter Pan by Disney, where he's, oh, Smee, the way of a man with a maid, taking the best years of her life and then casting her aside
like an old glove.
I went to a college course, and one of the other students was a pretty obvious mail-order bride. She was Thai, and the more we got to know her, the more she shared about the relationship. She was late 20s, and he was at the lower end of 60. He didn't work, but he received some big work compensation payouts and was apparently quite wealthy because of that. She told us they met online on one of those meet Thai ladies who were just dying to be your girlfriend kind of sites, and after talking for all of 2 weeks, they agreed to marry. This country is a little bit stricter about those sorts of unions,
period, so there were some hoops they had to jump through, such as he had to go to visit her for a certain amount of time in Thailand before starting the process. But essentially, they were engaged after a few weeks and married within a few months. The guy essentially wanted one of those stereotypical Asian marriages where the wife was subservient and existed to please their husband. She would tell us he would make her wait till he was done to eat, and he would only let her eat ladylike foods like salad. He paid her a monthly salary, which was pretty abysmal, and she had to use that for clothing and other essentials. He also wouldn't let her go anywhere by herself and would drop her off and turn up an hour before classes ended in case we got let out early to drive her home. I remember we had to do a group assessment, and I had given her my phone number, and he forced her to delete it. I'm a female. I think the saddest part was when she asked a bunch of us if we could get birth control pills for her because her husband kept destroying her scripts/pills, and you could tell she was absolutely terrified of getting pregnant. The weird thing, though, was that she wasn't terribly bad off in Thailand. Her family was apparently quite wealthy, and she had her own home and stuff over there, but for whatever reason, she didn't want to live there. Personally, I would have ran the second I saw that purple-faced blob of a husband.
See, this is the situation I normally expect to come from this, but I'm not going to be surprised when, it's the other way around.
My dad had one a few years back. He met her online and flew out to get her after a while. She was shut in and was legitimately afraid of me because she thought I was smoking pot. Funny thing was that I had never smoked pot at the time. I was 17. It was a weird dynamic. If I was home, she stayed in her room, unless I'd been in my room for an extended period and she deemed it safe to get food from the kitchen. My room was in the basement, just for clarification. The few times we crossed paths, she would see me, gasp, and then run to her room. My dad never saw this as a problem. He basically catered to her every want and need. Also, I should mention, he was 56 and she was 29. A year later, I moved out. Since then, she has attacked him on 2 occasions and had him arrested. Eventually, he sent her back, or maybe she left. I don't know. I no longer speak to my father, so that's the extent of my knowledge.
I agree with this too. That is such a weird dynamic to have with an individual that lives in your home, man. Imagine that, you walking through the hall. Oh, hey, lady who is presumably banging my parental figure. How are you? Ah! Runs into a frickin' room.
Although my parents were always too ashamed to admit this to anyone but myself and my sister, my mom was a mail-order bride about 23 to 24 years ago. This was before all of the online companies that do this, so my father had to find my mother in a sort of magazine catalog of Filipino women. He sent her letters and she replied. Over the course of a year, they finally met and my mom moved to my dad's tiny hometown. They got married and they had 2 daughters together, one being myself. They were both looking for a better life and someone who would treat them better than past partners had, and they both got that. Plus, it turns out they both have the travel bug, so now they're retired, living a nomadic life traveling the globe, and they got more than they've ever hoped for. Sure, I've always known there were some serious cultural differences between my parents that they've never been able to fully reconcile with. My mom, being from a very traditional village in northern Philippines, had a hard time understanding a lot of North American norms and beliefs, and they butt heads over a lot of small things. These cultural clashes have taught me so much, though, and their collective love and travel and culture has inspired me to study anthropology and travel around the globe. I can't imagine having lived in a home where we didn't eat bacon, rice, pancit, and steak, or purple ube birthday cakes on a regular basis. TLDR, my mom was a mail-order bride, resulting in a long-term happy marriage between my parents and purple birthday cake for me.
Purple birthday cake sounds pretty rad, and I gotta say, out of all the ways you can get a mail-order bride, the fact that this guy had to do it without the use of the internet or something is, in a way, only in a way, a little bit respectable. The fact that he had to send actual letters and then wait for those letters to be delivered and then wait for a reply back, and I don't know, the patience this man must have had. I know a guy who married a Russian gal, supposedly not quite mail order, but someone he'd known online for years and spent time with several times over the years. He had learned Russian fairly fluently as well. Her actually gaining citizenship required a number of interviews over something like 2 to 3 years to establish legitimacy and so on. During the very last interview, where she would have finally been rubber stamped in, she admitted to cheating on him. During the interview, deal over. He withdrew support from her and told her to take a hike. Last he heard, she she had fled the state before immigration could deport her and now was just another illegal immigrant in the U.S. Strange thing was she had a young kid, not his, that would have definitely been born during the time they were supposedly involved long distance. Sounds like he should have seen this coming. He was definitely heartbroken about the kid though, treated him like his own anyway. All she had to do was shut up for just one more hour, let the paperwork get finished, then ditch him and she'd have gotten off completely free and legal. Man, why would she do that? Like, you know, the land of milk and honey is right there before you, Russian lady, and you just like threw it all away by admitting it. I mean, maybe on some level the guilt was there? I don't know. I'm curious why she like gave up the ghost.
I used to work retail with a Filipino woman who was a mail-order bride. She was a tiny little thing around 35 years old, and her husband was a very large, stocky white man around 50 to 55. I thought it was very weird when she first told me, but when I met him and saw them together, it actually seemed like a nice fit. He was always coming into the store to bring her lunch or to buy her things and pick her up from work on his motor scooter. It was pretty cute watching them ride it together. It seemed like he really enjoyed spoiling her, and when she talked about him, she seemed very much in love with him. It didn't appear that he was particularly wealthy or anything, but he treated her very well and they seemed very happy. Just before I left that shop, she had just became pregnant with their first child.
I guess it's one of those things. Who would I be to judge someone for how they meet the woman that they love if they're genuinely happy together? I mean, I think one of the most popular ways to meet women nowadays is Tinder, which is kind of depressing, but I guess that's the way things are with people being less and less sociable nowadays.
I have been married to what some might call a mail-order bride for almost a year now, but first let me correct a few common misconceptions about how it works now. In the USA, at least. First, you can no longer just get a catalog and pick a woman out of it and pay to have her sent to you. 20 plus years ago, maybe, but not anymore. In order for her to get a K-1 fiancé visa, you must have met her in person at least once and provided substantial evidence of a meaningful relationship, such as pictures with both of you, email, phone, chat logs, or other documents such as travel records showing you were both in the same place at the same time. You can apply for an exception to this on cultural grounds if both you and her are part of cultures that regularly practice arranged marriages. Second, she still has to go through all of the procedures involved in getting a permanent immigration visa. That means background checks, medical checks, which can usually only be performed at a very short list of places who naturally charge a lot. Tons of documents from both parties and an interview in person at her country's U.S. embassy, or sometimes at a consulate, which might be a really long way for her to go if she doesn't live in her country's capital city. Third, if you meet her through a service legally known as an international marriage broker or IMB, designed specifically to match Americans with foreigners looking to marry and immigrate, you have to get a background check done on yourself, and that information is then given to her as soon as you start talking. This information includes things such as your criminal record, especially any history of domestic violence, your marital and family history, number of previous wives, divorcees, number of children, and personal information, age, full name, legal name, etc. All that said, I went on a tour of Thailand as a combination vacation and to meet some of the women on one of these sites. I was 34 at the time, and the next youngest man who was there at the same time as me was 48. And I'm pretty sure all of them, 8 others, had been married before at least once. As for the women, some just seemed like they wanted money or free food and drinks. Others seemed like they just found foreigners more attractive but had no interest in leaving their country. And very, very few seemed like they might be honestly interested in me and in moving to America eventually. Most of them I couldn't even have a conversation with since they didn't speak enough English. I consider myself lucky to have found the woman who I ended up marrying, since she was both one of the honest ones and she had a university degree in English. I kept in touch with her daily over internet chat and video chat, and I flew back to see her 3 additional times before the 5th and final time when I flew over there with my family and she flew back with us. We had a traditional Thai engagement ceremony while my family was there, and we had a small courthouse wedding a month after we got back to America. Our first anniversary is next month, and right now she's going to an American community college to try for an associate's degree here while cooking me delicious Thai food all the time. So I'd say it's going great so far. We've had a few arguments and fights, like I assume most newlywed married couples do, especially ones that didn't live together before marriage. But I'd do it all again in a heartbeat.
See, that's the interesting part about reading all these Reddit stories and everything. It's interesting to learn about these processes. Like, obviously, this has its upsides, its downsides, and whatnot. I guess good for the guy. He's celebrating his first wedding anniversary. Like I said, I'm just a bit mixed on, like, the whole, like, morality of mail-order brides, I guess. But quite a few of these seem to have worked out quite well.
My sister's father has a mail-order bride from China. She was a divorcee with a 17-year-old son. I only got to meet her once, but she was really nice and cooked the most amazing food. Last year, my sister's dad finally started taking Chinese language classes as a surprise and found out that her cute nickname for him was Fat American.
Don't even ask me the logic of, like, why I pick the voices I do for these stories, because there's no logic to it. I just come out with one and then I dedicate myself to it. It's pretty much just for the sake of variation. My uncle is married to a wonderful Filipino mail-order bride. He's a socially awkward Aspie. She's warm, gregarious, and funny. They've been together probably 18 years and have a great, well-adjusted kid. As a teen, I thought it was such a weird relationship. I imagined for her that it was very shallow and lacking in fulfillment. Now I can see that they both get a better life. Her financial situation improved as well as that of her family back home. She has a beautiful child and she married into a pretty nice family. For my uncle's part, he has a wife and daughter who care about him and help him navigate the world. I adore her, mostly because she was good to my grandmother, Uncle's mom, and she visited her all the time, called her mom, made sure her daughter, she's my cousin even though she's younger than my own kids, had a solid relationship with grandma. All in all, I think my uncle seriously lucked out meeting such a great bride. To be perfectly frank, there have been too many positive ones that I'm not even thinking about the main topic right now. I'm honing in on they were my cousin even though they're younger than my own kids. So does anyone remember Johnny Capahara? And it was like two movies about a Hawaiian guy who moves to like Aspen or something. It's somewhere with snow and all that, and he learns to snowboard rather than surf. But then in the sequel film, he goes back to Hawaii, I think, and he meets up with his grandfather who has had like an illegitimate child with someone. So that makes this young boy Johnny Capahara's uncle, and he like holds it over and like, I'm your uncle, you should listen to me, even though he's like 10 years old and Johnny is like 17 or some crap. I don't know. That's all I'm thinking about right now.
I used to play Magic at a game store where the owner often went to Thailand to star in Shemale Smut. He was very open about it and would tell you about it and show you the DVDs if you asked. Anyway, on one of his trips, he decided to bring home a bride. She was a very nice younger woman. They lived in his store. He converted the back room of his comic store into a studio apartment, and she basically stayed in that back room all the time. He would occasionally yell at her to make him food, and that was generally the only time we would see her. She stayed with him just long enough to get citizenship and then bailed on him.
Ungrateful wet. No, that's good for her, to be honest. This guy sounds like a pig. What I'm more curious about is if he had a penchant for, the best of both worlds, I guess you could put it. Well, what was she packing? My neighbor growing up had a mail-order bride from either Russia or Ukraine. They had a son, and he was a butthole. We had a bonfire one night, and he decided to surprise me and everyone else around by throwing batteries into the fire. Messed everything up. Came home from a half day at school one day to see cop cars in front of the house. Turns out that the father was beating the wife and graping minus the G the son. That's why he was always kind of messed up. I was waiting for a messed up one like that. Am I happy that I found it? Not particularly. Hope that guy's rotting in jail.
Okay, this gets a little crazy. Everybody knew my neighbor was gay. It was a fact and never questioned. Let's call him Terry. Terry was about 45 and lived alone in his inherited mother's house. That was 4 doors down from us. He kept himself to himself and seemed pleasant. One day, we were surprised to see a Taiwanese woman about half his age had moved in. Let's call her June. June didn't speak much English and loved gardening. Over the next few months, our neighbor's house was slowly transformed into a mini botanical garden with a small fountain, new fences, and the start of a new driveway. One day, out of the blue, I heard a loud bang at my mother's front door. I was about 17 at the time, visiting from college. I opened the door to find June stood on the pavement throwing poo at my mother's windows. Yes, actual poo. I shouted at her, "What are you doing, madam?" To which she ignored me and stormed back to her house. Now, this was back in early 2003, so after telling my mother what had happened, we took the good old British route of cleaning it up and not causing trouble. The pool was hard and not an issue to remove from the window frames, front lawn, and fence. We thought that was it and laughed it off. Big mistake. The next time I visited my mother, I noticed that there was more poo on my mother's front lawn and the lawn of our elderly next-door neighbor. Confused but incensed, I stormed round to Terry's house with my bag still in hand and banged loudly on the front door. Terry answered with a surprised look on his face, shaking. I shouted at him, "Tell your wife to stop throwing poo at my mother's house, you weirdo!" and marched back home. A few days passed and my mum was pleased to report no issue. My outburst had worked. The next-door neighbors sent me a box of chocolates as a thank you, and we celebrated with a barbecue. It was during that barbecue that the neighbor mentioned her cat had gone missing. My mother also had cats, who often roamed for a few days but always came home for dinner. We assured her he would be back and not to worry. A few days passed and we realized one of my mother's cats was also absent. Then 2, and 3, along with the neighbors. It suddenly dawned on all of us that the poo June was throwing at the house was cat poo from her garden. We have put up flyers, etc., but haven't seen the cats since. Meanwhile, Terry and June's new driveway looks lovely.
Okay, all circumstantial evidence points to her absolutely abducting or killing those cats, but, I mean, you can't just, make accusations like that. But I have to say, if my dog went missing or something, I have a dog, and, I had an inkling that the new neighbor 4 doors down or something took it, well, I would cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war.
I know several guys who had mail-order brides. Oh, were military or ex-military. That's why so many mail-order brides were from places where there were U.S. bases, like the Philippines. One guy, ex-Navy, brought over a Filipino wife. He seemed to love her, but she did not adapt well. She would never answer the phone if he was not home, even though he explained it was him calling her. She wouldn't drive his car and a bunch of other things like that. She seemed nice, but was lonely, so he brought over her sister, and things really changed. We used to travel for weeks for work, and one time when we got back, the wife and sister were gone. Killed him, and he never saw it coming. That was years ago, and I never heard what happened.
Absolutely not surprised. But, okay, so I've actually been saving this, so here's the thing. I also know a guy, not technically a mail-order bride, but he did have a wife that he brought over from Thailand. And he's actually done this a few times. I think he's gone through 3 different women. And he's a nice guy. He's actually just had some unfortunate luck, or I believe one left him. One died, sadly, and currently he's very happy with another woman. Anyway, I'm in my late teens, and I'm going to work with him because the guy I usually worked with wasn't available. So he picks me up from my house, and I'm like, "Hey, why do you have this little Buddha statue on your dashboard? Are you, Buddhist?" He's like, "Oh, no, my wife, she's Taiwanese, and she is Buddhist." And I look at him, and I say, "Oh, so does she not believe in, physical or worldly possessions or anything like that? Is she very spiritual and stuff?" And he, stops for a minute and looks off while he's, staring down the road as he's driving and everything. He turns to me for a quick second and goes, "Yeah, she's not Buddhist." He knows this because she is a really hard gambler and apparently quite the money grubber, but that was long ago. And again, I'll say this, no foul play in his life or relationships or anything. He's very happy now, which I am glad he is because he's a nice guy.
What are some common forms of sexism that men face? I was a single dad for 20 years. There are a lot of places that still reflect parenting being dominated by mothers. From mom's talk mornings at my son's school to being told that Koabo.com didn't want me because I was a dad. And then there were the assumptions that I didn't have custody. Some by state officials, with me repeatedly needing to explain that he was in my care 28 days of the month. I'm certain if the situations were reversed, I would have been ordered to pay more than $60 a week for child support. Heck, if I was in California, I might have had to end up paying her child support even as our son lived with me 28 days of the month. I could probably give examples all day. I do excuse most individuals' behaviors as they are making assumptions based upon what's true 90% of the time. The systemic stuff needs to change, though. Women and men are no longer in the same place in society as they were when these laws were written. As someone whose father is a nasty piece of work who also didn't pay child support, I have to agree with this. As they said, men and women are not in the same places that they were when these laws were written, societally, at least not in the West. Thus, I don't think it's controversial to say that more cases need to be judged on an individual level by who is in the wrong and who has done what, no matter what their gender or anything is. The double standard. I remember watching a clip from The View, I think. I don't remember too many of the specifics, but the topic of conversation was that a woman who had become fed up with her husband and his actions had proceeded to cut his penis off in the middle of the night and threw it into the trash compactor, or something like that. Again, details are fuzzy. One of the ladies, might have been Sharon Osbourne, talked about how hell hath no fury or he shouldn't have been messing around, and the crowd went wild. Most of the women in the audience and on the panel were clapping and whooping it up. Then one lone female member of the panel, I wish I could remember who it was, it took quality courage, spoke up and said that them all laughing about this wasn't right. In fact, it was quite wrong. She pointed out how differently the panel and audience would have reacted if the situation had been a man who had cut his wife's breasts off and thrown it in the dishwasher, regardless of what actions they were upset with or felt grieved. The idea of mutilating your spouse shouldn't be met with laughter and applause. From what I remember, some of the other ladies on the panel tried to say, "That's different," and others rolled their eyes or became uncomfortable. I remember thinking what courage it must have taken to call out the double standard right then and there, on television with the studio audience clearly already on the side of the original joke. It shouldn't matter what your gender is. Call out double standards when confronted with them. Apparently, the show was The Talk, not The View, and the woman who had the courage to speak up was Sarah Gilbert. Thank you. Let's be honest, it's not just a gender thing. The world is absolutely full of double standards in race, religion, and all kinds of things. Really, it's just a people thing where some people just cannot stand to be called out for their bad behavior, but are more than willing to just shout to the heavens how someone else has done wrong. My wife and I decided to hire a male nanny. This decision causes me, my wife, and the male nanny to experience a whole range of uncomfortable situations. Because we live in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of people assume we're a polyamorous couple. We are not. Some people assume that me and the male nanny are a gay couple and my wife was our surrogate. On the first day of school, for example, my daughter's teacher introduced us as her daddies, even though she had met with my wife on multiple occasions beforehand. Others simply can't wrap their head around the fact that a man might want to work in childcare. I can't tell you how many warnings we've received, even from within our own families, that we have to watch him closely because it's not a natural thing for a man to want to work in childcare. He must be a pedophile. When it comes to raising children, men still face an enormous amount of sexism from all sides. This is incredibly true. Men who want to work in childcare are looked at very strangely because it is an odd thing why a man would want to be involved with a child that isn't their own. I mean, hell, there are some men out there who don't even want to be a part of their own child's life. So, I'll admit, I understand the skepticism. TLDR, domestic court system is biased against men start to finish. I was stalked by an ex. Everyone was like, "You must have given it to her good, LOL. To top it off, I was treated like the criminal every time I called the cops. When I went to file for a restraining order, I had to ask 3 times because they kept referring me to a courtroom assuming I had been served. And the icing on top, the judge I finally got treated me like I was a whiny baby and gutted the restraining order. I'm still convinced the only reason I got it at all was that I had my family there for support.
I fear for any day that I'm in public with my niece and her parents are nearby. Little kids can become emotional and are too young to understand the ramifications of shouting something like, 'You're not my dad,' when they get told something they don't want to hear."
This is true. It's all too true. If a man sees a child that's lost potentially and it's like, oh damn, that kid needs someone to check up on them or whatever, you have to weigh it out in your head how appropriate or weird it might look for you as a man to approach a child. My husband and I have 2 daughters. One is his stepdaughter and I have joint custody. A few years ago, my friend paid for me to fly out to Seattle and stay a few days for her birthday. Our daughter was almost 2. My mom went into a panic. Who is going to watch the baby? Well, her completely capable and loving father is here. And I guess since he is a competent person with normal functioning cognitive abilities and, he's her father, I guess him? She does this anytime I do anything by myself. Where's the baby? Who is taking care of the baby? Her father, you goddamn shrew. Sorry, I ranted a little. Well, that sounds like a personal issue of the shrew. I mean, there is a typical thing in sitcoms and whatnot, especially family-orientated ones, where the father is usually an idiot with maybe every so often a smidgen of good advice or something, but for the most part, they're kind of an irresponsible jackass. So I just think at this point it's a problem of the shrew ladies. TLDR, men are perceived to be disposable. Young men in every society are viewed as infinitely disposable. They are cannon fodder. Everyone craps themselves when female civilians are victims of a battle in war. No one gives 2 craps about the young male soldiers, most of which were either conscripts or forced into the military due to lack of opportunities. Civilians equal women and children. Read any of the recent articles about Aleppo. The headlines or text in the article always has this crap like, many of those killed were women and children, or 1 in 5 of the victims were women and children, and it's infuriating. Like, who do you think the other 4 to 5 victims were? Freaking trees? I googled Aleppo and went on to Google News, and this was the last result. I haven't read all of the articles, of course, but I'm sure a lot more specifically mention women and children and leave out men. Male disposability is real. How many victims of violence in video games, movies, TV shows, plays, books, etc. are male? Now tell me how many victims of violent crime, the homeless, army casualties, and members are male. Yet these things are barely talked about. What is one of the leading causes of homelessness? Divorce. What is the leading cause of divorce? The man losing his job. Which gender has a higher successful self-deletion rate? Men, 5-to-1 ratio. Which gender has a lower life expectancy? Men, -5 years. Which gender gets the majority of government funding and funding from charities for healthcare? Women. And I'm sure that everyone knows about the situation with divorce cases and family courts because people seem to at least be aware of the problem there because of organizations like Fathers for Justice. Then we get to the prevention of domestic violence against women and girls specifically. That's freaking dumb. Why not try to prevent it against everyone? Women, men, girls, and boys. Men are much less likely to seek aid for domestic violence, and there are barely any domestic abuse shelters for men, whereas there is a huge amount of shelters for women. My point with all of this isn't screw women, they have it good. It's that sexism against men isn't acknowledged because men are seen as disposable, and it's society's and the government's fault. I'm glad this individual specified that this wasn't a screw women, they've had it too good for too long kind of thing, because Lord knows in very many places outside of the Western world, they've still got it pretty goddamn bad. Getting crap for being teachers because men plus kids equals he's a pedo. At least that's the one off the top of my head that makes me the angriest. My abusers were female. I started doing a lot better in school once I had male teachers around. I've always felt safer with men. Aw, look, Dad's babysitting today. Hell no. He's parenting, like he's supposed to. Stop flapping your dentures, Grandma. Father stays home with kids while Mother works. She must have his nuts in a bag in the freezer. Or maybe he's just too dumb to get a decent job and his wife has to take care of all of them. Granted, I know one family where that's the case. He's too mentally ill to work in most environments, so she teaches and he stays home with their kids. But that's not the norm in the Mr. Mom situations I've seen. That is the first time I've ever heard of a Mr. Mom. Is that like, it's like a label, it's a situation, whatever? All I'm thinking is Mr. Men. I found out that I'm unattractive a few months ago. It felt pretty bad, to be honest. A co-worker/friend of mine who I've been pals with for nearly 2 years, and I know her husband and am great pals with him, came to work very dressed up. Way more than normal, so being a friend and wanting her to know I noticed how great she looked, simply commented, "Wow, co-worker, you look very nice. Going to a wedding or something?" She laughed it off, and that was that. Later on, I got a message from her. "Hey, about what you said, I've known you for a long time and I know you didn't mean anything weird by it, but that was kind of creepy. Don't say things like that. Just wanted you to know." I felt terrible. I didn't know how what I said was construed as creepy, but I apologized and let it go. When lunch rolled around and we were hanging out in the lunch area when another co-worker walked by and said, "Wow, you look great. Got anything planned after work?" She blushed, thanked him, and then he left. I sat there waiting for her to say something like, "See, how weird," or something like that. Nope, so I brought it up. She said it wasn't really that creepy, so I pushed the issue and we talked about it. After a long discussion on why me saying it was creepy and him saying it wasn't, we came to 2 conclusions. It was either weird because she's known me for much longer and it was weird to be hit on by a close friend, while it wasn't weird for someone she only knew a bit. Or it was because he was handsome and I was not. Okay guys, let's rewind a bit. The first few "she's a C-word" responses were fine, but it seems like everyone thinks she's a total B for saying that. I'll defend her because I don't think she was trying to be a butt about it. Both the text and the chat at lunch were very open, and I genuinely think she was looking out for me. She's married, and I'm great friends with both her and her husband. I still regularly hang out with them, and they both have bent over backwards to help me. So I'm not being used or being mistreated. I think there is a weird knee-jerk thought process that someone you don't find attractive flirting with you is creepy, while someone who is attractive is kind of empowering. But it goes both ways. If a 60-year-old lady who smoked since she was 8 told me that I looked great, I'd internally squirm if I thought she was hitting on me. Compliments are nice, but if we think we're being hit on by someone we don't find attractive, I think a lot of people think it's either gross, weird, or creepy, and that's unfair, but even I'm guilty of it. Guys, I've gotten like 20 plus responses and PMs telling me to get fit, wear better clothes, groom myself, etc., etc. Holy crap, guys, I appreciate the tips. I look fine, though. I found out I'm ugly was an exaggeration, a joke. Story is true, and the guy who was more attractive than I was more attractive than I, but I'm not Sloth from the Goonies. Geez, no, I don't want to buy your personal trainer service. Why would you even PM me that? Okay, so at first I found the whole, a few months ago I found out that I'm unattractive, and it felt pretty bad, TBH, and that was funny. That was funny as hell to me. The thought that it's the other day I found out I am ugly. I don't know why that tickles my ribs, though, for some reason, but the bit where it's if someone compliments me or flirts with me and I don't find them attractive, it's creepy and weird, everyone thinks it. No, I'm a man. I don't get compliments just all the time, really. If someone wants to compliment me, even if they are a chain-smoking 80-year-old woman who's been smoking since she was 8 and she's all like, well, aren't you a handsome young man? I will take that compliment and I will even flirt back a little bit. I mean, I literally did this to a Scientologist lady the other day that I was kind of trying to eke out a bit because they were trying to invite me to a goddamn music festival.
Aren't you a handsome young man? Would you like to come to this music festival?
They're gonna be chicks as lovely as you there, ma'am. I didn't go, of course, but wouldn't it be funny if I could have gone down that path and got married at the Church of Xenu 10 years down the frickin' line? I'll begin by saying this actually happened to me. Anytime a woman claims any form of sexual harassment, the man is automatically guilty and forced to try to prove his innocence, because the company doesn't want a lawsuit. I literally had a female subordinate give me a hug because I let her off early to go to a family function. I came to work the next day and was immediately sent to the boss's boss's boss, where I was advised that I was being put on unpaid leave during a sexual harassment investigation. As it turns out, the entire thing was right under a camera, so you could clearly see her hug me. Even so, I was told that she said I told her to hug me before she got to leave, and then I got fired. Scum behavior, hate it. My knee-jerk reaction, although it's not a perfect answer, is that people who make accusations like this, especially more serious accusations that go to court, if it turns out that it's coming from a place of malice or personal gain and under false pretenses, I think the accusee should be held responsible, or maybe even to a higher standard of responsibility and punished as such if they are found to be lying. But again, that is not a perfect answer to these issues, because then you gotta consider the process in the jury, in the investigation and whatnot, and how things can go wrong, and how actual victims can be left in a destitute situation. I know some of y'all hate it when I go a bit too long on the personal commentary, so I made it nice and short for you, but I'll be back. The employee bathrooms at my job have been scheduled for an update. The work on the men's room started a week or two ago Monday and ended this past Monday morning, during which time the men had to use the public customer bathroom and the women continued to use their employee bathroom. On Monday afternoon, when the work began on the women's room, the newly refurbished, as yet unused by a single man men's room became a temporary women's bathroom, until the work on the new women's bathroom is finished. So the men have to go several weeks without an employee bathroom while the women never have to go a single day without one. Not exactly common, but it otherwise fits the question and is currently on my mind. Well, that is just legitimately unfair.
I'd be scared that those mean old dirty girls will poop in the urinals before I get a chance to.
I mean pee in the urinals, yeah. I'm a male nurse in the ER, and there are a lot of extra rules I have to follow that the females do not. If I'm doing any kind of perineal care, Foley, straight catch, pelvic, or even rectal temp, on a female patient, I need a female chaperone. However, a female nurse can go do those same procedures on a male without a male chaperone. The looks I get from many elderly patients when I tell them I'm their nurse, those judging eyes. I had a guy straight up laugh in my face and tell me my parents must be embarrassed by me. Mothers freak out when I'm the nurse for their child. I had a lady straight up tell me I couldn't help drain her daughter's armpit abscess because she thought I'd be eyeballing her. No. Literally none of this happens to the female staff members. And frankly, I'm a much better nurse than quite a few of them. I think it's been pretty well established there are just jobs where men typically aren't very welcome, or if you are there, you have a lot more rules and regulations that you must follow because of people's discomfort around you. I've just recently noticed something that bugs me a bit. I grew a beard throughout October to December. My girlfriend and all the women on her side of the family were quick to offer their criticism. I didn't really care too much and took it lightly. But after a while, I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like if the tables were turned. Like if my GF started wearing a shirt she just bought and really loved, but my brother, dad, and myself criticized it every time she wore it. That would be messed up, and people would take her side immediately. Talk crap about my choice to grow a bit of facial hair, and no one bats an eye. I feel like this is kind of a straw man argument with the whole if my wife decided to wear a shirt that she loved and I criticized it, then everyone would side with her immediately. Not necessarily. If it's a crap shirt, it's a crap shirt. I don't freaking know, man. I grew a mustache last year for Halloween so I could do a Ron Swanson outfit. I got crap. I didn't give a single crap about what other people thought. Goddamn self-deletion. You want to raise awareness for self-deletion and mental illness? Yeah, fill your boots. But it gets on my frickin' tits when it's all directed towards the struggles women have regarding mental health and self-deletion ideation. And yet the male gender is chastised for anything regarding to ending it early or mental health. The notion of a man to be a strong and mentally powerful individual is a crock. It doesn't define a man. How he deals with it is how it defines him. True dat. I'm a girl, so I don't know firsthand, so tell me if I'm wrong. I consider it sexist that boys have to be tough and play with Legos and all that crap, even if they want to play with dolls. If their favorite color is hot pink, then that's wrong as well. Growing up, they are not allowed to be emotional, to cry, or to need someone to help them. They can't look for comfort because they have to be manly. Also, in many places in the world and social environments, they are expected to pay for a girl's food, drink, whatever. For her birthday, you should give them something expensive. For what it's worth, it does not happen where I live, and in my circle of friends, mostly educated middle-class people, but I can see it all the time. It made sense when women were not working, but now you don't know whether the woman actually makes more in her job than her date, but he's still expected to pay. I don't know about everyone else, maybe I'm just lucky. I mean, there have been times where I've just paid without saying anything, but, I've gone on dates with some pretty considerate women who have offered to pay for their own food and everything. I don't doubt that there are women who can be kind of bratty or insistent that you pay for their meals and all the date and everything, but, I certainly have not come across one like that yet. I was trying to be friendly to a woman during lunch at work. She was literally sat across from me. Mind you, we had been trained alongside one another. So I said hi and asked how she was. She told me that her boyfriend's grandpa died. She said that she got really close to his grandpa. I said that I was really sorry and did my best to empathize. I asked how long her and her boyfriend had been together. She said 4 years and I said congrats. She told me all about her kids and asked me questions about work. Mid-conversation, when she had done most of the talking, she picks up her phone, dials a number. It's her boyfriend, from the sound of it. She says, yeah, I was just calling because this guy was being way too friendly. I have no attraction to this person on a sexual level at all. I did not make passes at her, flirt, or anything. In fact, up until then, I had tried to keep it friendly but strictly professional, but she insisted on talking about her family, so I gladly lent an ear. We just had friendly exchanges up until then, and I thought that she wanted to be friends. Apparently, I was wrong. In that moment, I realized that I can't get a date to save my life, or even get a woman that I am attracted to maintain more than a minute or two of conversation with me before writing me off. And yet, I give this woman that I have no interest in the impression that I'm being too friendly when she gave me every reason to believe that she wanted a friend to talk to. F my life. This can go both ways, but yeah, I know some women who are a bit too egotistical for their own good and just kind of assume that anyone approaching them is immediately attracted to or wooed by them in some way. The same thing does happen for guys, but it's usually in a way where it's like, wait, is this girl interested in me? She's like asking me about my hobbies and stuff like that? What's going on here? There's no perfect way to remedy this at this point, it's just a societal norm at this stage, but whatever. People who have surprisingly woken up admitted into hospital. What happened? I hopped into the back of a mate's pickup after a rugby game, went to sleep and woke up in ICU in traction with no feeling from my waist down. Turns out we had a head-on collision with a drunk driver and I went through the back of the cab picking up a host of broken body parts including 4 compressed vertebrae. A year and a number of surgeries later, I walked out of hospital an inch shorter and with enough metal in me to set off metal detectors at airports. I was the lucky one. The other 3 guys in the truck never woke up afterwards. 20 years and it still gets me. The accident happened in Zimbabwe, where I grew up. I've traveled a fair bit since then, but I'm now a bona fide Kiwi. I didn't find out about the others for a while. Aside from being zonked on pain meds, I don't think I was capable of understanding what had happened. Visitation was restricted in the ICU to my folks, but the day after I was moved out, most of the 2 senior teams and some of the staff pitched up to tell me the nasty truth. The tiny ward was crammed with big, burly, ugly guys crying their hearts out, and I loved every one of them for it. Not sure where I was going with this, but I've ended up here. Here's a thought from an old guy with a messed up body who walks with a constant limp, has tried every legal and many non-legal relief options for the daily thrum of pain, who has had 2 decades of survivor's guilt, and who knows firsthand the debris that is left behind when someone is tragically and unceremoniously yanked from life, their family, and their friends. If you're not 100% in control, don't put the key in the ignition. Don't put yourself in harm's way, and don't risk messing up someone else's life. Call a cab, take a bus, walk, but for Christ's sake, don't drive. I think he covered everything that I felt like saying about this topic. 18-year-old me got super wasted on Smirnoff watermelon vodka at some little club in Clearwater, Florida. Apparently, I fell off a bar stool and busted my head. When I woke up, I wasn't even sure what state I was in. I accidentally called my friend's mom in North Dakota trying to get a ride to somewhere other than the hospital. A decade later, and I still can't drink anything with that watermelon flavor. I get that feeling, not with artificial watermelon flavors. I love that in sweets, in drinks, whatever. I absolutely love it. The actual fruit watermelon, kind of mid, not gonna lie. But I can't drink sours with a Z. It's a drink. It's disgusting to me now. I was 12 in 1982, woke up in a hospital bed feeling fine, no idea what happened, nobody else in the room. Last person I remember hanging out with was my friend, Scott. So I call his house, his mom answered, advised me to call my parents. No answer at the home phone. So I'm sitting in this bed trying to figure out why I'm even here. I finally discover that the rolling table over the bed opens up and there's a mirror under the lid. Across my forehead and down the whole right side of my face are fresh abrasions. Oh. That's why. Finally, get a hold of Scott and learn the story, which I still don't remember. Was riding my bike down a sidewalk near the grade school. Sidewalk takes a 45-degree left turn and I cut the corner. Grass is deep and a little wet and my front wheel catches the edge of the sidewalk, flipping me over. I landed on my face, dragging against the other edge of the sidewalk, knocked out cold. Another neighborhood kid was in the area, hustled back to alert my parents. My dad took me to the hospital in his car and I woke up the next day. Yes, my parents just left me in the hospital by myself. Waking up in hospital on your own as a kid would absolutely suck. I mean, I remember being admitted to hospital for, I won't go into it, but, you know, it does suck. Hospitals just suck. Was at the pool. Next thing I know, I wake up in a hospital bed, feeling very cold and my throat hurts. Turns out I had actually drowned, but the lifeguard had pulled me out and reanimated me for about 45 minutes. Then I was flown to the hospital by helicopter where I lay in a coma for 2 days, during which they kept my body temperature low to prevent cerebral damage caused by lack of oxygen. I could go home a week after the accident. The way they described the lifeguard reanimating them, I'm picturing like a necromancer or something. My brother and I were outside playing with squirt guns. This was 2001, so I would have been 11. Next thing I know, it's Easter Sunday. I was in a hospital bed with a massive headache and blurred vision, and the last thing I remembered was 4 days ago. Apparently, I fell backwards and smacked my dome on the curb hard enough to fracture my skull and bruise my brain. Got 2 weeks off school, which was cool back then, and I've had to wear glasses ever since. Apparently, according to my mom, the first sign of consciousness in the hospital was me getting out of bed, taking a whiz on the floor, and then going back to sleep for 2 more days. The whole thing was a weird experience. Being in hospital in general, especially when you're freaking 11 years old or something and all alone, would suck. I understand why it would be a weird experience. I was running a half marathon with a friend and we had just passed the 10-mile mark and I felt like I was getting into a groove after I struggled a bit the previous few miles. Woke up the next day in the ICU with my family all around me. Heat stroke plus rhabdomyolysis. I was admitted with a temperature of 108.6 and they were telling my family to prepare for the worst. I had to stay in hospital for a few days and then take it easy for a few months, but otherwise came out unscathed. Don't recommend it. Rhabdomyolysis, often called rhabdo, is a serious medical condition that can be fatal or result in permanent disability. Rhabdo occurs when damaged muscle tissues release its proteins and electrolytes into the blood. These substances can damage the heart and kidneys and cause permanent disability or even death. And that's what rhabdomyolysis is. Woke up in the hospital with my roommate and her mom asleep in the chairs in the room. I started freaking out because I was 7 months pregnant and my pregnant belly was obviously not pregnant. My screaming woke them up. My fiancé and I had been hit by a drunk driver.
killing my fiancée, and I lost the baby. I had been in a coma for 3 days. I have some really gnarly scars that my kids like to make up crazy stories about. My favorite being the time I fought off 3 knife-wielding psychotic carnies and murdered them with my bare hands. Well, you know what? I'm glad there was a semblance of a happy ending for this lady. I was 16 and hit by a Ford F-350. I am a tiny human, I'm under 5 foot, and this truck hit me going 40 miles per hour when I was in the crosswalk. The hit launched me across the entire intersection. I don't remember anything 20 minutes before until 10 days later. When I finally woke up, I had been in a coma for 5 days. Both my lungs had collapsed, I had 3 blood transfusions, a chest tube to drain the internal bleeding, 3 surgeries, and the whole left side of my body broken. I couldn't walk and my vision and memory had been damaged. It's been 6 years and I'm doing great now. You wouldn't even know anything happened to me except I have memory issues and arthritis. But I like to think I came out on top in this situation. I think they did as well. I was at a party with a friend in some college town. The street we were on had these 3-story apartments built side by side. The whole street was partying, even on the roofs. We got separated and it was time to go. We don't live in that town. Anyways, I see an ambulance going down the street and I knew it was for my idiot roommate. So I follow the ambulance and sure enough, he was laying on the ground barely conscious. He tried to jump from one building to the next and didn't even come close. Luckily for him, his head broke the fall. A few weeks later, he finally asked, "Oh yeah, hey man, that night we went to Lawrence and I woke up in hospital. What happened?" Yes, it was Lawrence, Kansas. I don't know the street. It was 2001 or 2002. Yes, he did have a concussion. He was fully unconscious for a couple minutes and everybody thought he was dead. They said he was laying there with his eyes open, unresponsive. It wasn't until someone dumped a bottle of water on him that he was roused into a semi-conscious state. Other than having chronic headaches for a month, he was fine. Glad everything worked out, but what a stupid prick. Woke up in the hospital, too weak to press a PCA pump, being told I'd been in a catastrophic motorcycle accident. Had suffered extensive injuries to my entire, except my left arm, spine, and head, thank the universe, body, and had been in a medically induced coma for 5 weeks. I lost any memory of the event or the week prior to it. I was hit by some unrepentant doucheburgers who were out on parole, repeat offenders, and decided it would be a great idea to assault a 7-Eleven clerk, rob the store, and lead the police in a 30-minute chase at excess speeds up to 100 plus. Their joyride ended when they went the wrong way on the freeway and took my on-ramp going 70 miles per hour against the traffic and slammed into me at a net speed of 120 miles per hour. I was going 50. We know all this from the police report. I never had a chance since the on-ramp sloped up, then back down to enter the freeway and I hit these guys at the crest of the hill. Never saw them. The impact sliced through their engine block, so they ran on foot after that. The police recorded their statements after being followed by helicopter and being apprehended as, "What you arresting me for?" They got 9 and 5 years in a plea deal and I was notified when they were each let out after serving less than half the sentence. Please note they were 100% sober, knew they hit me, and they left me to die. I'm a generally compassionate person, or at least I try to be, but I hope their lives are a living hell and that they live a long time. I hope they never get the chance to hurt someone again, but I fully expect that that's what they've done. For my own mental health, I'll never try to find out what's become of them. This was over 10 years ago and I have a good life now. Loving GF, a mortgage, a super smart border collie, everything I ever wanted, although it's been a serious struggle. I didn't get any money except for $50K from the Victims of Violent Crimes Fund, plus, remarkably, their auto insurance. My medical bills were $3 million plus, but I was insured, thankfully, since I just started the job 6 months prior. I used that money in my hospital/recovery time to get my MBA and have worked hard as hell to move up in my new career since I knew I had to change. I'm not very agile anymore. I'm still severely and permanently disabled. I'll never run again, nor have any real balance. I need a cane and lost the use of my dominant arm. But I'm lucky since I still have my faculties and look relatively normal. I don't own a motorcycle anymore and will never attempt to ride again. You need 100% of your physical faculties as well as mental to do it safely. I don't blame my motorcycle at all. I miss riding and probably wouldn't have fared much better in those speeds in a car. If you ride and are reading this, please make sure you buy the best safety gear and wear it every time. I'm only here today because I did, and no amount of skill would have saved me from being in the exact wrong place at the exact wrong time. I was wearing a Nolan flip face helmet, $300 at the time. Thank you, Nolan, for your outstanding quality and commitment to safety. I still have the helmet, and it's scratched and cracked all the way through. That could have been my skull. I agree with your sentiment. Screw those guys, but I do believe you would have fared a lot better in a car.
Wife, 2-year-old son, and myself went to visit a couple of friends out in the country. Had some food, had a couple of drinks myself, had an amazing time. Wife was sober. I was wrangling my young one back into his car seat to go home. He was so overtired and unhappy, but I made sure he was good and snug, and pulled out of the driveway after waving goodbye to our friends. I came to almost a month and a half later. I could barely move my legs and arms due to the neuropathy and fatigue. I had a feeding tube up my nose and a colostomy bag. The doctors told me that I had actually come to a couple days before while I was still in intensive care, but the nature of the anesthetic they had me on meant I kept kinda waking up, fading back, and forgetting everything. At this point, I was able to remember things normally. They told me right off the bat my son was fine, completely unharmed and in the care of a very old and dear friend with 3 kids of his own already. My wife was alive and relatively uninjured with the exception of some damage to her leg and a moderate brain injury that she would recover from slowly. They kept the details about the accident from me for a few weeks while I was recovering, but basically my wife missed a stop sign in the middle of a dark, poorly marked country road and we got T-boned by an SUV. Other driver was fine. It's been over 2 years since the accident. I got the strength back to walk again, but because of pins, bolts, plates in my left ankle and shin, I'll never likely be able to run again. The neuropathy in my legs wore off and eventually wore off in my arms to the point where I can use them normally again, but it was a lot of therapy retraining them. Suffered PTSD about 10 months after by the time I was back at home. From time to time, I still have nightmares about something that I don't technically have the ability to remember. That is just downright scary. Smash cut to a month and a half later and you don't remember anything, but you're getting PTSD-driven nightmares about it? Not me, but my girlfriend's sister jumped out of a window Tuesday morning. She's schizophrenic, so there's other issues there besides just trying to self-delete. She's still sedated and hasn't woke up. Broken vertebrae in neck and lower back, but they don't think she's paralyzed. Slight bleeding on the brain that they're relatively sure didn't cause damage. Busted ribs and torn up lungs they had to remove part of yesterday in surgery. Some other broken bones, etc. They have her sedated/unconscious to prevent her from moving due to the broken vertebrae. I wonder if she'll be disappointed when she wakes up later in the week. On the plus side, her parents are having a Cambodian guy come in to do an exorcism, so that's going to fix everything. Love her, but her parents are something else. Old school Vietnamese. Maybe this is just me, but I imagine she was exceedingly disappointed when she woke up. Snowshoeing, and by snowshoeing I mean a short, slow trip on a relatively flat, groomed trail because I in no way represent an athlete. Finished the trip and am standing on the edge of a parking lot looking over Lake Tahoe from Echo Summit. Next to me, 2 guys are filming some sort of ski ad, I assume. One guy skis down the cliff, hits a mogul, does a somersault, and then somehow stops to climb back up and repeat. Guy 2 is filming. Skier guys may be covering about a football field distance over and over again. It's a cliff and he acts about like he's getting up during an ad to get a soda from the TV. Ski, mogul, flip, stop, up, repeat. I enjoy the view and muse on the comparison between my pathetic activity and this guy's and think, okay, time to go. I immediately fall on the ground and can hear my wrist snap as it's caught in the strap on my ski pole. Get up, walk painfully back to my car, a quarter mile, curse all the families driving erratically and allowing their children to careen around the snow play park. I'm a little grumpy with the pain, then realize I can't get my keys out of my pants pocket. Ask a woman who looks like a mum to help. She steps into that extremely uncomfortable, intimate distance and reaches her hand deep into my disgusting pocket and fishes out my keys. It was very awkward. I thank her profusely and to this day will bless her and wish that she and her descendants may people the earth. Drive to Barton Hospital for a temporary cast. Drive home. It's not easy driving with one arm and it's no doubt illegal, but I made it. I have another equally exciting story about a broken and dislocated shoulder from a bike ride. Doesn't exactly fit the criteria of this topic, but it was a nice shake-up, I suppose. I remember parts where the paramedics were taking me to the hospital in the ambulance, asking me about a 666 tattoo I had and something about how one of their sisters also attempted self-deletion. But I lost consciousness again before I could say I didn't remember even thinking about self-deletion. I woke up in the hospital and apparently I drank way too much and my dad found me unconscious. Everyone thought I tried to delete myself because I was alone, so it took a while before they just let me go without being taken to a psych ward. I was actually pretty depressed, and now I wonder if I was trying to die. I just feel bad about apparently throwing up on my cat before anyone found me. My dad said she was meowing next to me until someone came home. Not gonna lie, I almost lost it when they mentioned that
they threw up on their cat. But I also have to commend that cat for its level of loyalty. TLDR, woke up from a coma with fungal pneumonia, spent about 76 days in CCU, had left lung removed. I might have a story that fits in here. Happened about 3.5 years ago. I'd been kind of sick with the flu for a few weeks. Couldn't seem to shake it. I'd get a little better, then a bit worse. This was right before Christmas 2012. That year, Christmas Eve and Christmas was on a Monday and Tuesday. So I was just pushing myself to get to that sweet 4-day weekend, thinking I'd just relax and that'd get me past it. So I rested hard all weekend, wasn't eating much, just stayed in the easy chair. The day after Christmas, I still wasn't feeling up for work. I was still at my folks' house for the holiday, so my mom being my mom was all, if you're too sick to work, you're going to the doctor. I didn't have insurance at the time, so I hadn't been. Went to one of those urgent care places instead. I was there for a little while, don't remember much around this point. I remember we left after a while, then waking up in CCU about 12 to 14 days later. Turns out I have the beats. Now, I hear from a lot of people that this is how they find out they are diabetic, either very low blood sugar or you go into DKA and get flu/pneumonia. This is where my story takes a house-like turn. Most of the following info I got secondhand after the fact. When leaving the urgent care place, apparently my mother had been told to take me straight to the ER. She got me to the closest one and they took me right in. Didn't even wait on the paperwork. They knew right away about the DKA and pneumonia, but something else was wrong. They did MRIs, ran blood tests, checked for strokes, heart attack, about everything. Something was still off and they didn't know what. I went into respiratory failure that evening and they had to put me in a coma and on life support. They sent the blood to the labs. Now, in-house, they get results back in a few hours and try something else, then run another test and try something else. I'm not sure how accurate that is for most situations. In my case, they had determined there was an abnormal kind of infection in or in addition to the pneumonia. The culture had to grow for 10 days for them to see what was in my blood to make a solid diagnosis. So the data came back and the infectious disease doctors working on me spent several days poring over everything she could find to learn what it was. She found a picture in an old textbook of a fungus called rhizopus. Once they figured this out, they were able to find a medicine that could treat it, though it'd be a 13-week course of intravenous treatment and it was highly toxic just for kicks. So they pulled me off the sedation after 10 days and it took me a few days to wake up. Apparently, they told my folks to start planning my funeral, so that's creepy. When I woke up, they started the treatments the next day. I wasn't out of the woods yet though. After I woke, the pulmonary doctor did a brachioscope to see my lungs. She said they looked like they were full of pink fluff, like cotton candy or pink marshmallow fluff. That was on Wednesday, January 9th, 2013. She did another scope that Friday and said it looked less inflamed, so that was great news. And she said she'd do another on Monday. The weekend passes. She comes back and runs another. This time, when she put the tube in, apparently a sweet odor was released immediately. My mom says she said, "Do you smell that? Something smells sweet." My right lung looked even better. My left lung, well, she said looked black and green and spiky, so that's a bad thing, I guess. The lung had begun to die. This is a part I remember for myself really clearly. I woke up from that procedure and the nurse told me to wait a moment and left the room. She came back with the pulmonary doctor, a surgeon, and my mom and dad. Oh gee, Mom and Dad have been crying but are smiling through it. That's not a good sign. The surgeon explained what they found and said we pretty much have two choices. We can do surgery and remove your left lung, and you have about a 50-50 chance of surviving, or we can keep you on the medicine and do everything else we can for you. Now, even being all doped up and half asleep, I knew that meant praying for a miracle and making me comfortable while I died. Now, I'm a Christian. I have faith in miracles and such, but I also believe one of the greatest things we have as a species is a brilliant and curious mind that has led to such things as music, art, bacon, and medicine. So I'd be a fool, in my opinion, to ignore the advice and help of the fine doctors and nurses in front of me. And to be honest, I remember thinking to myself in that moment, I've never had a major surgery. It'll be interesting if I come through. So I wrote surgery on the little marker board I had since I couldn't speak. I had surgery the next morning where they removed my full left lung young. Afterwards, I remained in CCU for a total of 76 days, 99 days total in the hospital. I still had to run the full 13-week course of that medicine. I had a lot of rehab and therapy for months after. A lot of it dealing with the extensive muscle atrophy in my legs and arms and pretty much everywhere. 3 years later, I've much improved. I lost a bit of mobility in my feet, both from the atrophy and the diabetic neuropathy. My stamina isn't what it was, obviously, as my oxygen capacity is about 55% of what it was, we think. At rest, I still can hit about 95 to 97% blood saturation, which is normal. At moderate to heavy activity, it drops pretty fast. Still working on improving that. Got a good job, got a girl. Overall, things are actually a lot better than it was before. Nothing like almost dying to spice up your life. I feel like I emphasized the fine doctors and nurses a bit too much. It made it sound like they're all kinda sexy. Like everyone else on here, I'm glad things mostly worked out and there was no loss of human life in these. I can only imagine what it would be like to just wake up and it's like, oh damn, like what happened to me? It'd be very interesting, of course, but it'd be scary as hell. Actually, on that note, I do remember being in hospital, going under anesthetic, and then waking up like 2 days later or something. Of course, in comparison to a lot of people on here, that is absolutely nothing. Law enforcers, have you ever come across a crime so stupid or ridiculous that you just let it slip? Not the US, to clarify for everyone asking. This was in South Africa in the early 90s. When I was in high school, the rugby team found out I had learned how to drive but not yet received my license. They all knew I did not drink, so one of them had the genius idea of inviting me to parties as the designated driver. We'd lost a popular kid to a drunken accident a few months earlier, so it was actually a good idea. It was a great arrangement, lots of parties, lots of girls, and all I had to do was get them home in one piece afterwards. It went great for a few weeks, until one night. The police had heard there was a big party on a farm outside of town and decided to set up a roadblock. So I come driving up to flashing lights, car filled with 5 big drunk guys, including one passed out with his head out of the window, and little scrawny me barely able to look over the steering wheel, and the inside of the car smells like a brewery. The officer takes one look at the car and asks me to step out. Have you been drinking? No, officer, I don't drink. Has me take a breathalyzer. 0. Looks at me. Can I see your driver's license? Sorry, officer, I don't have one yet. I'm getting it next week. And I point back toward the car, but they have theirs. He looked at me, flipped his little book closed, and said, just take them home. Next time I see you, you'd better have your license. Under the circumstances, this sounds like a pretty reasonable officer. Like, better the guy who's gonna get his license next week and sober be driving now than one of these guys be trying to. I overheard this one last night as I was sitting near 2 Indiana cops at Panda Express. So this lady had a warrant for an unpaid ticket and missed court date. I bring her in and it turns out that her address is wrong and she never got the court summons. The original ticket was for possession of a black bass under 14 inches, and since she admits the court summons, it was now on her record. So if she goes to apply for a job and they inevitably ask her, do you have any criminal history, she's obligated to say yes. Now imagine if the employer asks, why? Because I caught a small fish. Maybe I'm dumb, but I am confused.
I was at a convenience store buying beer while 2 cops were milling around looking at soft drinks and snacks. One employee was working the register while another one was throwing out old donuts. One of the cops looked over at her and said,
You can't do that in front of the police.
It was funny because he sounded upset with her when he said it.
Always nice when people have a good sense of humor.
My ex-fiancé was a cop for a redneck town where the people didn't have much money. He was called to the grocery store where a little girl about 9 was being detained in the manager's office for stealing a box of tampons. He said she had tears and snot everywhere and her pants had obvious bloodstains all over the front. My ex then bought the box she was trying to steal along with 3 more boxes, some food and milk. He then drove her home to a trailer that was falling apart. It wasn't so much the crime that was ridiculous, but more the manager's reaction. I guess when my ex came in, the manager was just screaming at this terrified 9-year-old.
That's a nice story, a fine story, a good story. But my question is, what did you do to drive away such a good man? A kid, of course, I don't know the ins and outs of their relationship. I frequently, or did when I was in uniform, let impaired care or control slide. If I found someone sleeping in the back seat of their parked car after drinking, it demonstrated to me a decision to not drink and drive. I'd often take keys or drive someone home, but arresting them just seemed wrong. Long as they're not obstructing traffic or in a really inconvenient place, I think that makes perfect sense. I was the lucky one once, not charged by a cop.
In college, my friend had a massive house party. I woke up the next morning face down in a puddle of drool in the bed of my truck. Went inside and found out the cops had busted the party and everyone got underage tickets. Over 30 people, except for me. Not sure if they took pity on me or never saw me, but they had my truck boxed in with squad cars. The lines on my face from the rubs on my bed liner took 2 days to go away.
Well, aren't you a lucky boy?
Not a police officer, but I witnessed it happen. I got a phone call from a police officer using my buddy's phone. Apparently, my buddy, a jackass, got so drunk he fell out of his car in the drive-thru lane at Taco Cabana. The cop told me I had 15 minutes to get there and pick up my friend. I made it in time and the officer helped me throw my friend in the bed of my truck. He told me to take my friend home and when he woke up, tell him he was a goddamn idiot. The police officer was a homicide detective in the major city in which we lived, and he said he had real crimes to solve and to stop wasting his time.
You better take your drunk little jackass friend home. I got donuts to eat, coffee to drink, and murders to solve.
A long time ago in a life far removed from my own, I had a nasty dope addiction. I cleaned up my life and had been clean for 3 years. My friend had been learning to become a tattoo artist and asked me if I wanted one. To repay his kindness, I picked up a 30-pack and some tequila. After about 3 hours of him digging in with the gun and most of the beers and booze gone, we came up with the plan. We were going to go to the city and score some dope. Didn't take long and we accomplished just that. We found a nice, quiet, dimly lit parking lot to pull in and get to getting high. We break out the gear and started. He got his ready faster and got it done. I was out of practice and fumbled around a bit. Just then, someone knocked on the window. It's the cops. We rolled down the window and they asked if we knew where we were. Before we can say anything, the cop said, "This is the fucking police station parking lot. Are you frickin' thick?" They took the dope and sent us on our way, and I now have 13 years clean thanks to that cop. You know, in times like that, I can't help but think that well, if you're that stupid or just unaware of your environment, then yeah, you deserve to be arrested. But in this case, I guess things worked out. There was this guy where I used to live who would walk around smiling strangely and approach people trying to shake their hand. As soon as he got a hold of their hand, he would try to kiss them. A friend of mine naively accepted his handshake and literally bent over backward trying to avoid the kiss. A couple of churches in the area had this thing at the end of their service where everyone would shake hands so this guy would show up to reap the harvest. Cops were called on him a few times, but to my knowledge, they never arrested him, but just drove him far away from the area and dropped him off and made him walk all the way back. I'm just picturing that interaction as, "Oh, well, nice to make your acquaintance, old chap. What are you doing?" Brother-in-law is a cop. We'll call him Jack. He used to ride a bike in downtown Toronto during his first 2 years. Canadian cops ride in bikes and wear tight shorts during summer, by the way. So he was on a side street when he spotted a car driving like 10 kilometers an hour and every 5 seconds stopping suddenly like someone hitting their brakes hard and starting again. So he follows the car going around in a 4-block circle wondering, what the hell? He decided to check if maybe something is wrong with the driver and needed help. He gets close to the car and he hears the driver, which was male, groaning. He immediately thought the driver was having a health issue. He rides up to the driver's window and puts his hand on the car and at the same time asking, "Sir, are you all right?" Driver slams his brakes and Jack sees a female lifting her head off his lap and hastily, the driver covering his crotch. He tried so hard not to burst out laughing. Driver was so embarrassed when Jack asked for license and registration. He said it was also obvious the woman wasn't a hooker because of her looks and the red face of shame. So the driver croaks up "Is there something wrong, officer?" while my brother Jack was looking at his license. Jack told the driver that he was driving too slow and he seemed to be in distress and next time he would be better off trying not to have engaged in a sexual manner while behind the wheel. He said all that in a very stern voice while looking at the guy straight in the eyes. He didn't give him a ticket or arrest him. When he returned back to the police station, he relayed the whole story to his buddies. They call him Spoilsport Jack now. It might sound a bit juvenile to say, but I love earning nicknames in the workplace. My time to shine. Now, I was the lawbreaker in this case, but the cop was so utterly dumbfounded and amused that he just let us go. Let me tell you the story of the 12-person Prius. It was around 10 p.m. on a Friday night and was my first day in college. It was freshman orientation day during the summer, and we got to stay in a dorm for the night. While my group was getting to know each other, we decided that we should find something fun to do. However, being in a small town, our options were limited. Thus, we decided upon visiting the glorious Walmart in town. About the most most fun place to go. Our plans were thwarted though when we discovered that we were all dropped off by our parents and didn't have a car. We sure as hell weren't going to walk 8 miles and we didn't know what to do. But then, the twins piped up. The identical twin sisters apparently didn't come with their parents and instead borrowed their parents' Toyota Prius for the weekend. Great! So, with a car ready to go, we start for the parking lot, but then somebody did a head count and mentioned to the group that we have 12 people. Our hearts sank. How could we bring 12 people to Walmart with a Prius? One person suggested taking 2 trips. One person said maybe we shouldn't go. But then somebody suggested that we all squeeze in. It was brilliant. And after thinking about it, 100% feasible. So we got to work. 2 people in the passenger seat, 1 driving, 7 in the rear seat, and 2 in the trunk. It was a masterpiece. Thus, the journey began. Nearly touching the ground and easily bottoming out the suspension, we set forth for Walmart. We got about half a mile from campus before we were pulled over. The cop was speechless as he counted as each person exited the car. Sergeant Casper, his name was. Casper was the friendly cop. He could barely contain his laughter. He simply told us that he didn't want us getting hurt, that we should walk back to campus, and that he was impressed that we fit that many people in the car. We sat there and chatted for about 20 minutes and left, never to fit in the Prius again. Casper, the friendly cop, the friendliest cop you know. My wife got pulled over one night while I was riding in the passenger seat. She was driving my car and it didn't have automatic headlights and she forgot to flip the switch. The cop walks up and gets both our licenses, checks them and walks back. He issues my wife a warning, then gives me a ticket for presenting an expired license to an officer. He tells me it's the same as presenting a fictitious license to an LEO, and it's a $250 fine. I was confused because I had just renewed my license a year earlier, but before I could ask, he had ran back to his cruiser and drove off. Sure enough, he wrote down my license issue date as the expiration date. So I go to court to fight it, take a day off work, wait around at the courthouse for 3 hours. Finally, my case gets cancelled and I talk to an AITA. He says if my license is current now, then I'm off with just court costs. I explain the mistake the officer made. His eyes glaze over and says, if we go to the judge, it's gonna be the full line. I explain again and he says, fine, we will go to the judge. Another hour later, the judge calls the case and I explain it again. He asks to see the citation and the ticket. I present them. He looks at it and his face kind of squishes up in a what the hell look. His exact words were, who is the dumb butt cop wasting my time? Charges dismissed. For those who don't know, I say for those who don't know, the actual quote from the judge are words that I am not at liberty to say. I once got pulled over for speeding 15 over. I had just gotten Taco Bell, and when he asked me why I was going so fast, I said that I'm just really excited to eat my Taco Bell. He laughed, gave me my license back, and let me go, saying that was the funniest excuse he had heard all day. I think that's as valid a reason as any to let someone go on a speeding ticket. I was on foot patrol in central London about 2 in the morning. I turned a corner and saw a group of very drunk ex-public, privately schooled for you colonials, schoolboys staggering along the road with a collection of the usual ubiquitous parking cones. They had about 10 cones between the 5 of them. I stood there for about 5 minutes, walking this lot sodding about, when one of them spotted me. He then made an attempt to warn his friends that he had spotted me, but they were so drunk they didn't take any notice. He then gathered as many cones off of his friends that he could carry, staggered up to me and said, Officer, I would like to hand these over to you as I think they are lost property. I burst out laughing and walked away. Typical, such a typical drunk juvenile act to do in England. I was young and went out to buy some condoms at a store. I spent a long time standing there trying to figure out what to get. Finally grab a box, then wander around the store working up the nerve to actually purchase it. I chicken out, put them on some random shelf, then go walk out of the store. As I get to the door, some lady in her 40s comes running up to me and in a slightly out-of-breath voice demands I hand over the condoms. I'm shocked and answer, wide-eyed, that I don't have them. She doesn't believe me, so I sheepishly lead her to where I ditched them. As I leave, again, I realized just buying them would have been a lot less stressful. My advice for buying condoms is just slam the pack down and do not break eye contact no matter what. They'll respect you because you're practicing safe sex. I was hammered one day walking home with a bunch of my friends. I see a trash can and running dropkick it. Of course, it sends trash everywhere, and all I hear on a PA is, pick it up. Cop there the whole time, never got out of the car. I picked up the trash can and put all the trash back and went on my way. Cool cop. Give a hoot, don't pollute. When I was in high school, my buddy and I left during lunch to go get our biology cat that he'd left at home. A biology cat is one that's being dissected. It was all splayed out and opened up on a dissection tray, essentially a baking sheet filled with wax back so you could stick pins in it. We took off in another friend's car, a Beetle with no muffler and flat tires, and screaming to Mac's house about a mile away in a little lower middle-class neighborhood. Got the cat, put it on the back seat, and threw a dish towel over it because, well, it's just creepy. As I'm backing out the driveway, Mac tells me to be cool. There's a cop down at the intersection. We putter down the street and stop at the stop sign, and suddenly we're surrounded. Plainclothes cops come up and block us behind. Two standard cop cars come from each side of the intersection and block us in front. A cop gets out and yells at us to turn off the car and step out. We're freaked because we know that the car has all kinds of illegal substances hidden away in the glove box behind the dash, under the seat. We also have no idea why driving fast and loud in this neighborhood warranted such a massive response. We get out, hands on the hood. Officer starts to search the car. We tell him about the biology cat and point to the back seat. He lifts the dish towel up, looks at us, and stops searching the car. Everyone backs off and he tells us to get back to school, and if I wasn't busy right now, I'd haul you in for speeding in a residential neighborhood. Get your muffler fixed. After school, we found out that someone had been murdered in the neighborhood earlier that morning. 2 male suspects seen leaving the area. Our biology teacher laughed his butt off. Never so grateful for a murder in my life. I understand the relief, but I certainly wouldn't say it like that. Not a cop, but I was driving to North Carolina. It was supposed to be my brother and I driving, but he went out the night previous and got hammered, thinking I'd drive the first leg, then he'd finish it out. Well, he miscalculated how hungover he was and was useless the entire way. This was a 12-hour drive, but when we finally got there, my brother starts complaining at me. He needs to use the bathroom. We were in the city at this point during rush hour, so I was stuck in the left lane among a great deal of traffic. There was a left turn that could get me to a Wendy's, so I jumped into the lane. The green turn arrow became yellow, so I started slowing down. My parents and brother all scream some variation of, "Just frickin' go!" So I do it, and sure enough, I see the lights go on, pull into the Wendy's parking lot and turn off the car. A large woman gets out of a cop car. I swear she is straight from a buddy cop movie as the loud-mouthed comic relief, permed hair and all. She walks up and looks totally serious. My brother is in the backseat, hungover, pale and sweating. He leans forward and blurts out, "Can I please go inside while you do this? I'm about to poo my pants." Her serious tone just completely drops and she starts laughing her butt off. "Of course, honey, you can go." He jumps out and runs into the building doing the funniest butt clench I've ever seen. She ends up giving me a warning because she saw me hit the brakes, then heard everyone screaming at me. She warned everyone to not distract the driver and told me to ignore everyone else, which I know I should have done. So everything worked out well, and my brother ends up coming out with Frosties for the family because they wouldn't let him use the bathroom without buying anything. I would have just immediately forgiven them once they brought me the Frosty. If it's ice cream, a ice lolly, a slush puppy of some kind, if it's a frozen treat and you're trying to curry favor with me, well, you've got it, baby, you've got it. When I was in college, I woke up one morning to knocking on my door. I sleep naked, so just grabbed what was on my floor. It was a tank top and a frilly pink skirt. I opened the door to see a cop. At this point, I am experiencing the absolute worst hangover in the world and very possibly still partially drunk. He tells me that the landlord is paving the back parking lot and I need to move my car. I look at him and tell him there is no way I can drive it this time and say if they need to move it, they might want to do it themselves. Meanwhile, he is clearly holding back some laughter. He agrees to move my car for me and bring back my keys. I told him to wait a minute while I get them. Still trying to contain his laughter, he says, "Ma'am, they were actually in your door. I'm completely mortified and feel like death now." He returns 5 to 10 minutes later and tells me he moved it to the other section of the lot. I go back to sleep and a few hours later leave to go to class. Well, the car is absolutely nowhere in sight. I find a cop car parked not too far away and tell him what happened. He called in to the cop and it turns out the landlord had it towed. The first cop shows back up, apologizes, and offers to take me to the tow lot to get the car. On the way there, he decides to show off a little and is speeding through red lights and across town. It was pretty thrilling. The PD ended up paying for my towing fee. I mentioned the pink skirt because while we were on our way to the tow yard, he told me that he was holding back his laughter because the last thing he expected to see was a hungover girl wearing a tutu at 8 a.m. Apparently, that's what it looked like to him. And after seeing the keys in the door and what I had on, he envisioned the hangover type evening for me. This does not really fit the question of the post, but there are a lot of stories here of good guy cops helping out idiots in need and thought it was in a way relevant. I mean, that's precisely why I've been enjoying these stories quite a lot. I once woke up at the back door of a Chicago home, inside their 8-foot fenced and secured yard. I was awoken by 8 cops yelling at me and shining their lights on me, telling me to exit the yard and come to them. There was no way to get out of the yard, and the homeowner had to come take a lock off the gate to let me out. I was asked where my shoes were, where I lived, how I got there, and what the hell was going on. I explained I went to bed on my friend's couch around 10. Inside my pockets, they found a giant glass pipe and an even bigger piece of devil's lettuce cola bud. After some serious what-the-hell looks and giggles from the greatest cops in the world, I found myself being given a ride 2 blocks away to my friend's house. I apologized for being a sleepwalking idiot and for the illegal substances, which I then realized was still in my pocket thanks to some pretty awesome Chicago cops. They do sound like some pretty understanding and cool cops. But for real, how the hell did you sleepwalk 2 blocks away? I mean, the most I've ever seen someone sleepwalk is like 5 feet and then pee on a television set.
When I was 18, I got pulled over. Policeman asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I say, "Yes, because I did an illegal U-turn." He says, "No, because you ran a stop sign." He was so amused by my stupidity that he let me go.
Some of these policemen sound extremely easy to please. My friends and I were driving home one Saturday night and spotted a car that looked like it had veered off the main drag and up against a building. We approached the car and tried to see if the driver was okay, but he was unresponsive, so we called 911 and the police showed up. They roused him and started asking him questions such as, did he have ID? No. What was his name? He didn't know. What was his address? He wasn't sure. The more he talked, the dumber and more stoned he sounded. They asked him if he lived in Portland, the city where this was occurring. He replied, "Portland?" Like he had never heard of the place. They then asked if he was from Beaverton, Vancouver, Gresham, Oregon City, Hillsborough, etc. Each time he responded as if he never heard of any of the cities mentioned. The cops paused as if they had run out of questions to ask, so I thought I might be able to help. I asked the driver if he lived in Oregon. He stonily replied, "Where's that?" I informed him it was on the west coast of the USA between Washington and California. He asked, "USA? What's that?" I replied that it's the main country in North America. "North America?" he says with more confusion. "Yes," I tell him. "North America is one of the continents of planet Earth. Are you familiar with planet Earth?" At this point, both officers are giggling and no longer asking any questions, deferring to my interrogation. The driver looked up in the sky for a few seconds, then returned his glassy gaze to me. "Earth?" he asked. I replied that Earth is the 3rd planet in this planetary system around the star called Sol. "Where's that?" he wanted to know. I replied that Sol was located in the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. Perhaps he was from somewhere in the Milky Way galaxy. That did not seem to ring a bell with him. I asked, "What about the Andromeda galaxy? Might you be from there?" He got a bit excited and indicated that the Andromeda galaxy sounded quite familiar. I turned to the officers and informed them, "He's from the Andromeda galaxy." They were laughing to the point where there were tears streaming from their eyes. I turned back to the driver and asked, "Are you here for the weekend or just passing through?" He hadn't decided yet. I was very interested in how he was able to get his VW bug from galaxy to galaxy, but he wasn't willing or able to share that technology with me. A shame. The police officers give him a ride back to the local detox center where I'm sure he was able to meet some fellow traveler and share good times. Whatever that boy was smoking, it pretty near gave him amnesia. That is crazy. Doesn't even know what galaxy he's from. What stories do you rarely tell because nobody will believe you? I'm a living witness to something known as the McMasterville explosion. CIL, the paint company, made explosives. Their explosives factory, which was a giant factory on the same grounds as the paint-making factory. One night, the whole thing blew up. I was looking right at it when it went. Not just the explosives, but thousands of gallons of flammable liquids from other parts of the factory all went up at once. It was estimated to have the power of a 1-kiloton explosion. I lived on the side of a mountain called Mount St. Hilaire, a little over a mile away looking down at the factory site. When you see an explosion like that from a distance, the land ripples like water, like when you drop a stone in water. I was riding a bike. The ground shook me first, then the air blast knocked me on my butt. The factory was deliberately sunk into the ground and surrounded by a high trench wall in case it ever blew up so the nearby town of Beloil wouldn't get leveled. So the explosive force got punched into the ground and the factory was blown straight up into the air. Tons of wreckage rained down for miles. No one I know of was hit by anything, but many small fires were started all over the place. My next-door neighbor found a train wheel in his backyard, and it was red hot when he found it. Apparently, this occurred in 1972, and at least 6 people died.
that my father was arrested for stealing $100,000 worth of Hershey's Kisses, and during his time in jail I found out that he was not my biological father. My biological father owned a chain of restaurants that I frequented as a kid and teenager. I found all this out a few weeks after my 18th birthday.
What would you even want with $100,000 worth of Hershey's Kisses?
I was 6 years old and my parents took my family down to Disney World. Yay! On the flight down, the pilot made an announcement that if you looked out the window, you could see the space shuttle launching. It was kind of far away, but I could definitely see it in a plume of smoke. Very cool. We land in Orlando, and everyone is dead silent, glued to the TVs. It was the Challenger, and it exploded on launch. I saw the Challenger explode.
The 28th of January, 1986. I faked playing a xylophone for 2 years so I could go to China once. I played trombone for 8 years through middle and high school, and I knew a few people at my college before I went there. They convinced me to join marching band, but were always complaining that the band director wrote impossible drills, 10 counts to move, 30 yards in some instances, run through the bass drums, that sort of crap. I, being the genius that I was, figured, well, I played keyboard in a ska band for a couple years. How hard could xylophone be? Xylophones don't march after all. Answer: xylophone is pretty goddamn hard, and I'd never played one in my life before the first day of band camp, which is when the auditions were. The guy doing the auditions was the percussion instructor for the College of Music, and after my audition, he told me to put the mallets down, step back, and never play xylophone again, which, to be fair, I did butcher the crap out of hot cross buns due to some sort of administrative mess-up. They never got around to actually kicking me out that year, and I hung around and pretended to play the xylophone. Now, every 2 years, my college's marching band takes a big trip somewhere overseas to perform and yada yada yada, and I had entered on an off year. The second year, I show up and do the same thing, except the percussion instructor has been fired. I never really dealt with him beyond defending him with my ability to butcher xylophone music, but to my understanding, he was a general butthole and the music department had been wanting to chuck him out for some time, so they made a big stink about him doing some paperwork incorrectly or something. So it was left to our section leaders to audition the section, and being good friends with the section leader, he just said, "Jenkins, hit something every now and again, but not very hard, and make it look like you're playing," so that's what I did. I found the softest mallet in the place, barely tapped the keys, wham, bam, going to China. Everything would have worked out peachy. Except our band director also didn't pay any attention to the orchestra pit. So when he was doling out parts for the music we were going to play in China, he assigned me to concert bells. Like that tiny little 50-pound xylophone that has a sound that would cut through an aerial bombardment. Not only that, I had a solo at the beginning of The Moon Represents My Heart, which, as it was explained to me, is basically Somewhere Over the Rainbow for Chinese people. Everybody knows the song. It's a cultural treasure and not something you want to mess up at a national landmark, because folks will notice. So I busted my butt actually learning how to play that bit over the span of a couple months and managed to avoid offending the people of Shanghai and Beijing. Not all the people, though. A group of Chinese youths caught me urinating into a bush in Shanghai's club district, and I had to duck into a place called Highway 3 with my dinger still hanging out to get away from them. Got to play a set of concert bells on the Great Wall and see a whole bunch of stuff in China, though. It's ridiculous to me that seemingly no one who was ever in charge of this marching band really had any clue what the hell they were doing, or what was going on really with this band. When I was 19, some friends and I were visiting New York City. After picking them up from the airport, we decided it would be fun to drive down Broadway at night and see it all lit up. It was fun. We got some good pictures from the car, and around 8:30 we decided to drive home. Going northbound on the West Henry Hudson, we were talking and listening to some Journey when someone hopped the highway divider and ran out in front of my car, stopped, and looked right at us. There was no time to stop, no time to swerve, and at 50 miles per hour, he came crashing straight through the front windshield, hitting my best friend directly in the face. Immediately, I pulled over and called the police, then went to look to see if there were any slim chances the man might still be alive. I saw his legs swerved roughly 4 to 6 inches above the knee and on the road near where my car had stopped. My friend in the back seat was crying her eyes out, and my buddy was amped up on adrenaline and shock in the front seat waiting for the police to arrive and remove him from the car. Walking further back, I saw a bunch of people who had stopped to help crowded around the man. I saw his head caved in and a dark pool underneath him, before a kind old gentleman turned me away, saying, "You don't need to see this." In almost no time at all, the fire department was there helping my friend who had a broken nose and shards of glass embedded in his eye and face out of the car. When the ambulance arrived, they tried to pull him him in with the man I had hit, which made him freak out and refuse and wait for another ambulance. The cops on the scene took down my story and ran a breathalyzer on me, but I hadn't been drinking. At this time in my life, I didn't drink. Then put my friend from the back seat and I in the back of a car to try and calm us down while they waited for the investigators to arrive. I had called my mom, who lived outside the city, to tell her I had been in an accident and that she should come for support. After about an hour, the investigators arrived, took time marking off the scene, and interviewed us again about what had happened. The police were very nice and all of us were in shock. After interviewing me, I asked the investigator where I could go to the bathroom. He nodded to the trees on the side of the highway and said to have at it. So I stood on the dimly lit bloody highway near the trees and under the watchful eye of the 50-block traffic jam I had created, and let forth a stream I had been holding for hours. Afterwards, they took us back to the local precinct to finish paperwork and meet up with my mom and sister who were waiting there, after having left my stepbrother with my friend who had been taken to the hospital. They had gotten lost and caught in the same traffic I caused, which is why they didn't meet us at the scene. With the paperwork done, my mom asked what had happened to the man. The officer looked at my little sisters and then asked my mom and I to step outside.
It was DOA. He had been released from prison that morning.
I was shocked when he extended his hand to me and thanked me for helping to
clean up the city.
After going to the hospital to get my friend and stepbrother, we went home for the evening. The next day, when we picked up my car from the auto shop, I saw the meager sunlight, the after image of what had transpired, blood and brain matter all over the front of my car, an imploded front windshield, and entering the car to take it to a place to get the glass repaired, a large chunk of bloody skull in the passenger's seat next to me, hidden under some napkins. My friend who had been in the passenger's seat wandered over and I told him not to look inside, but he wouldn't listen and did anyway. I think that is when the reality of what happened sunk in for him, because his eye grew large and he turned around silently to go sit in my mom's car. The entire experience was completely surreal, especially during the drive to get the windshield repaired when alone I drove the car to the shop, the wind whistling through the broken glass.
I want to believe that when the cops said, "Thanks for cleaning up the city," the guy who died was maybe just a real piece of work and did some awful stuff, but maybe this dude is just completely indifferent about this stuff, which is pretty horrible. My other thought is that this individual also enjoys creative writing.
TLDR, almost had a knife to my brain because of some crazy quack doctor leaping to very rash conclusions. Don't you hate it when doctors jump to conclusions? I know I've posted this somewhere before, but anyway, I was 10, lived out in rural America where my closest neighbor was a football field's length away. Between us was an overgrown field that backed up to my neighbor's horse pasture. I used to run through the fields full blast with weeds and grass stalks and wildflowers that were taller than me. I didn't give a crap. So one morning I wake up and something isn't right. I have this horrible pain in my neck. My neck! Oh God, what happened to my neck? My neck was swollen to the point of it jutting past my chin. It was like a 350-pound person's neck on a little 90-pound girl. I screamed. Mom screamed when she saw it. We took off for the pediatrician right away. Of course, as fate would have it, my usual pediatrician wasn't in that day, so a stand-in was there. I remember very mild tests going on, nothing too crazy, before the doctor explains to my mother that it's a brain tumor and I'll have to have brain surgery right away. I am freaking out, and my mom isn't too calm either. She, however, rationalizes, and before she makes her plans to have them cut into my skull, takes me to her own doctor for a second opinion. The RN at that office peers at me for a minute, performs a few other mild tests, and then goes, "Aha," and lifts up my ponytail. She points at this small bump on the back of my neck and proudly exclaims, "Spider bite." 2 days rest and some penicillin and I was 100% again.
That was a pretty crazy conclusion to come to after it's like, well, when did the lump show up? Just this day. Then again, what kind of crazy spider bite was it? Around the age of 12, I was diagnosed with severe OCD. I struggled with it so much that I had psychiatrists say they could do no more for me. A therapist that made house calls, and I've even participated in studies, evaluated on the other side of a one-way mirror kind of stuff. Perhaps in desperation, my parents eventually sent me to a psychiatric hospital halfway across the country which specialized in the treatment of OCD. I was there for 3 months until my insurance ran out. Now I'm 22 years old and I've overcome it so much that nobody besides family even realizes anything is/was ever wrong with me. With all these people running around saying I'm so OCD, I eat my M&Ms one color at a time, and them not knowing me back then, I don't even bother divulging a part of my life they would be unable to comprehend the severity of.
You know, I totally get that. As someone with ADHD who used to get support of it when I was a kid, and I used to see these people, and they'd say to me things like, "So, is your ADHD better now? Is it gone yet?" And I go, "Well, I don't think it works like that." I absolutely hated those meetings, but my point is those issues, mental disorders, learning difficulties never really go away. You simply learn to adjust your life around it and behave accordingly in certain situations, and people often don't talk about that much. I'm late to the thread, so this will probably get buried, but hey, I feel like telling the story. It's a bit spooky. Hopefully someone will find it a good read. My mom and I moved into a completely normal/average house when I was about 15. Everything was fine. We loved it. One day I was home sick from school and I was messing around on the computer when I heard our garage door open. I freaked out and went down the hall to get my mobile phone and saw the hallway door that connects to the garage opening. I panicked and yelled, "Get out!" and 2 young boys slammed the door and ran off. I started crying and called my mom. I don't know why I didn't call the police first, who told me to go next door to my neighbors and she was going to come home from work. When she got home, she was speaking to my neighbor for a bit. She, the neighbor, ended up telling us that she thought it was probably the young boy that lived in the house before us. Apparently, he sometimes goes around to everyone's houses and breaks in and eats their food and watches TV and stuff. And for whatever reason, they were all okay with that. Apparently, he came from some sort of broken home and they all felt sorry for him, so they didn't call the police. Mom and I were completely unsettled by that and put new locks on all the doors that week. We didn't care if the other neighbors were okay with that. We weren't. A few months pass and nothing ever happens again. We figure he knows we're not cool with his weirdness and doesn't try to break in again. A week or so later, I'm in bed asleep and I wake up in the middle of night for no reason at all. I'm not hot or cold. I don't need to pee. I didn't have a nightmare. I just woke up. I had this incredibly uneasy and weird feeling wash over me. I felt like something or someone was watching me and I got completely freaked out. I went into my mom's room and slept in her bed that night. It kept happening a few nights and I thought I was just having nightmares or was getting scared of the dark for some reason. I ended up sleeping in my mom's bed for about a week because I got so legit scared of the dark now. I finally worked up the courage to sleep in my own bed one night, but I could barely sleep. I felt totally uneasy, nervous, scared. I got to sleep for a bit, but then I woke up again. I looked outside my window and I could swear I saw a face/figure of someone standing there. Obviously, I noped the hell out and ran back to my mom. One of the nights I was back in her bed. We were all asleep and feeling fine when I woke up to my dog on the end of the bed growling. Now, our dog is an old golden retriever and has never growled or barked at anything. She is a huge wuss and completely placid. She has no problem with strangers. Even if someone knocks on the door and comes in, she couldn't care less. So I wake up all dazed, confused, and half asleep. I hear the dog growling and I'm asking her, "What's wrong?" I look up from the bed and I'm not lying to you, there is a man standing in the doorway with a knife. I screamed like a banshee and the dog started barking at this point. Mom woke up and saw the man too. He went running down the hallway and out the back door. I'm crying my eyes out. The dog is barking her face off and Mom is frantically trying to call the police. An hour later they finally get here and of course the dude is gone. Morning comes and we go outside to see that the back gate has had its lock cut with bolt cutters and the door leading into the house had been smashed in. The cops come in and dust for prints and leave crap everywhere, but at the end of the day they can't and don't do anything. We moved out that same day and went to live with my grandmother and grandfather until we found a new house. Pretty much no one in the family believed us or thought we were just making it up for attention. My family are buttholes. A few weeks later, we get a call from the police, and they managed to match the prints to some teenager who just got arrested for breaking into another house. It's the same guy that was breaking into all the houses in the neighborhood and used to live in the house we were in. So Mom's talking to the cops and some of the neighbors when suddenly someone tells us completely casually, "Oh yeah, that's the Millet kid." Wait, did they just say Millet? Yeah, pretty much any Australian will know this last name. Ivan Millet, the serial killer. His nephew was breaking into people's homes and our home while we were sleeping with a knife, and people were okay with that. So anyway, we move into a new house and forget all about it. Until a year ago, Millet's nephew gets 43 years jail sentence. He and his friend murdered another teenager in the same goddamn place his uncle dumped all those bodies. WTF. So, the guy that broke into our house watched me while I was asleep and stood in our bedroom doorway hallway with a knife while we were sleeping actually murdered another teenager a few years later. Mom and I nearly fell over when we heard about it. No one really believes us, which really annoys me, but it really happened. Sometimes when I think back on what could have happened if I slept in my own bed that night, or if the dog didn't bark, or if we were never woken up, it really freaks me out. It's also left me with a huge fear of the dark. I get really uneasy if I have to go outside at night by myself or if I wake up in the middle of the night. Well, goddamn, I'm English and even I know who Ivan Miller is. But that is a legitimately terrifying story. I went to college at Belmont University in Nashville from 1999 until 2002. While I was there, I worked for record labels, as did a lot of friends who were all in the music business program. Well, one buddy worked for a label called Red Hill Records as an intern/gopher/indentured servant. So on occasion, we could go to events and meet industry people and artists, as this was a small label. They had an artist that we became friends with named Katie Hudson, who was a singer-songwriter at about 17 years old. We hung out all the time since we were just 18 ourselves and had nothing to do but study and bum around coffee shops. As our friendship developed, my roommate developed a huge crush on her. She never seemed to reciprocate the feeling, so I asked her what was wrong with him. You know, trying to be a good friend. And she revealed that she liked me instead of him. So, since I wanted to be a good friend, I had to turn her down because of his feelings for her. That girl went on to be Katy Perry. I kid you not. I suppose that's pretty impressive. I'm not really a Katy Perry person, but good for this guy. And while I'm not going to read them, some of the follow-up comments are pretty cringe. My friend's father owned a Mercedes CLS when I was a senior in high school. One day when his father is gone, we take it out. We have some ganja in both of our grinders in the cup holders, which was freaking stupid. We always put that stuff in the trunk. As we approach a downsloped hill near our school in the most cliche manner possible, he decides he wants to show me how fast his dad's car can go. The road was narrow and the slope was pretty steep downwards, but went right back up after it reached the bottom. He books it, and by the time we reach the bottom of the hill, we're probably going 90 miles per hour. Right at the bottom, we pass a cop, like frickin' fly right by him. He turns his lights on and tries to turn around, but one or two cars gets between us and him. The road was so narrow that he had to do like a 3-point turn to get all the way around. We start to frickin' panic. I have no idea what came over me at this point. Only about 3 seconds after we see the cop, but seeing that it took him so long to turn around made me look at my friend and say, keep going. We go to the top of the hill, still going fast AF, take a right, go about 100 yards and take a left into a neighborhood. We go down a random driveway in a cul-de-sac park and turn the car off. We chuck all of the ganja materials out of the car and slump down in our chairs, peeking back. We see the cop go around the cul-de-sac and leave the neighborhood. I swear to God, it was like the goddamn Italian Job. Never been so scared in my life. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off. My mom thought Paul McCartney kidnapped me. My mom was walking with me on the beach in the Hamptons when I was an infant. McCartney came up to my mom and asked if he could hold me. My mom was in desperate need of the bathroom and didn't want to go inside with me, so she asked if McCartney wouldn't mind watching me for a few minutes. Apparently, I started sobbing, so he paced up and down the beach and my mom couldn't find me when she came out of the bathroom. She called my dad and they spent 2 hours looking for me before they found McCartney sitting on a bench chair with me in his arms. I don't care if the baby's crying. You stand exactly where I left you with my baby. If someone trusts you with their baby, you don't move an inch. This may get buried and not be as interesting as some of the others, but I have one that nobody ever believes. When I was in 4th grade, I was completely obsessed with Chuck Berry. I mean, religiously obsessed. I still am to a certain extent, but that was back in the day when I was first discovering rock and roll. Well, as fortune would have it, Chuck Berry came to my city to perform at the local venue. He must have been in his 70s at this point. I was beyond excited, so of course, my mother, being the caring and loving parent that she is, bought tickets and we went. The whole entire show, I was in the very front, and then I had an idea. I didn't know if it could possibly work or not, but there was a pause, and I went for it. While Chuck was tuning his guitar, I started yelling, Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry! To my absolute bewilderment, he leaned in from the stage and with a huge grin on his face asked me, "What's up, little buddy?" To which I replied, "Can I please sing Johnny Be Good with you?" Holy crap, he says yes. I'm a 4th grader on stage at a huge venue with the father of rock and roll about to sing one of his most famous songs with him. He starts the opening riff. I'm shaking, but not from stage fright. No, it was from sheer shock of being in this situation. I start singing. The crowd erupts. I bellow out the song. At the end, Chuck asks me, "What's your name, young man?" I tell him my name. The crowd starts cheering my name for a solid minute. It was the most incredible feeling and hands down the best gift I've ever received. Now, personally, I'm more of a fan of Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? You just started doing the things you used to do. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below. People, what is your strangest glitch in the Matrix moment that cannot be explained? When my son was about 4 years old, one night he started hounding me to ring Nana. He had never asked to call her before, so I just put him off for an hour or so and he came back and insisted that I call her. Turns out she was sitting on her lounger experiencing a massive tachycardia event and couldn't breathe. I called an ambulance and met her at the hospital. The same week, she had a pacemaker and defibrillator unit implanted to fix the problems. To this day, I cannot explain what drove him to get me to call, but I'm very glad he did. He doesn't even remember it. I don't know why, for the life of me, but it just took me 20 times to clearly say he doesn't even remember it. This happened to people I know, not me directly. A woman who works with my mom was out doing her grocery shopping one night and ran into me at the supermarket. She told my mom about the encounter the next day and asked why I didn't recognize her, as we saw each other once every few weeks when I'd go and help with any heavy lifting at their store. My mom confirmed that it couldn't have been me as I was at home. The woman also mentioned feeling oddly nauseous during the interaction. I was about 16 or 17 at the time. Another woman I know said she didn't know I walked through the park near her home after work. Dumbfounded by her observation, I listened as she explained that she'd seen me every so often after work, walking briskly through a large park, which I do know of but have only driven past, as if I was exercising. She said I walked close by her the previous evening and she was going to speed up to catch up with me and say hello, but as she started to, she began to feel ill, so she slowed down and then sat on a bench for a few minutes. By then, she'd lost sight of me. This happened about 3 years ago and both occurrences were miles apart. I can't believe I forgot about this, but it happened when I was 20. I was living on campus on the ground floor of a 3-story building. There were only 36 people in the building, so I knew everyone by sight at least when this happened. A new guy moved into the 3rd floor. We'd exchanged pleasantries and I knew his name and what floor he lived on, but not much else. I was coming out of the front door one morning and he was coming down the stairs and said, "Oh, I just saw your sister going up the stairs." I asked him what he meant and he said, "Your sister? She's here all the time? She wears her hair the same as you?" I used to change my hair a lot. At the time, it was midway down my back and fire truck red. There was nobody on campus with hair like mine. I noped out and went back inside. You know, it might be hard to accept for some people, because I know we live in a time where everyone likes to think they're a special little snowflake, but some of us just have that face, that body, and even that sense of fashion. You just look like a lot of people. I stopped at a gas station on my way to work one morning. I take out my debit card and take my car keys with me and leave everything in the car. Pay for my stuff and throw my debit card in the metal cup I have in my car. Literally half a second later, I look down and my card is gone. Pulled apart everything trying to look for it and couldn't find it. I go to work and go home to find it sitting on my desk. Double check my bank account to make sure it was the card I used, and it was. To this day, I still have no idea what happened. I mean, I can't explain that either really, unless, you're a liar. Saw a dude with no face driving a car. No features at all. It was just blank. I did more than just glance at him. I was staring. Just smooth skin and a men's haircut. I've never told anyone because it's so ridiculous sounding and I don't think people would believe me. Probably a rational explanation for it, I suppose, but man, what the hell? Maybe some kind of prankster or whatever trying to freak people out or something, or maybe you were doing something you shouldn't have been doing while driving. I've posted this before, but my family go to a garden center near my town every winter. Pretty Christmas lights. Well, this one year, the day before we were supposed to go, I had a dream that on our way, the tire of the car came off and we crashed hard. It was such a horrible, graphic dream. My mom's leg had been crushed, my dad stuck, etc. Well, I told my mom in the morning and she joked that she'd checked the wheels. She actually must have. She said the car had felt weird and the dream unnerved her. Lo and behold, the tire is loose and needs to be taken to a mechanic. Really weird experience, especially as I've never had a dream feel so real before. Well, you know what they say, with great power comes great responsibility. Now come over to my house and dream up some winning lottery numbers if you would be so kind. Once I walked into my living room from the hallway, saw my mom in the kitchen pouring a bowl of something fully clothed, important to the story, and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" She ignored me, put something in the fridge, and walked into her room. I figured she didn't hear me and walked into my room. Not even 2 minutes later, she walked into my room, soaking wet, in a towel, and tells me she had fallen asleep in the bathtub and had just woken up. Weirdest crap ever. That sounds pretty believable, actually. Year 3 or 4 at school in the UK, so I'd have been like 7 or something. Anyway, at the end of school we all had to line up in our year groups in the yard and we would be led by our teacher to the front of the school and either onto the bus or picked up. The pathway from the back to the front of the school was narrow, so all single file. I was walking along, chatting and laughing with my peers in front and behind of me. Next thing I know, I'm stood on the path, completely alone. The teacher comes running back from around the front of the school and says, "Greg, hurry up, you'll miss the bus." I'd literally missed/skipped a few minutes of time. I've always remembered it. The answer is simple, my friend. We are nothing more than sleeping slaves. Diavolo is doing whatever he be doing in Italy and using King Crimson all over the goddamn place. But in all seriousness, this has happened to me as well. I've blanked out going from point A to B and had no recollection of my journey to point B. It's something that happens. People just go on automatic sometimes. But it certainly doesn't change how jarring it can be. Not the strangest, but the most recent. Early last month, I went online to pay a bill, like I've done for years. I get to the last page before finishing and the web page freaks out, with a multitude of display issues before finally receiving an error message. After several attempts to pay, I give up, assuming the site is having issues. I go back 2 days later and pay my bill, and it goes through normally, with me getting my usual text and email notifying me I paid. I'm very confused a few weeks later when I check my email and find a notice from the company whose bill I paid with a semi-threatening email saying the bill is due that day and do I need to set up a payment plan. I've been dealing with the company for almost a decade and have never been late in paying. I check my credit card account and there's no record of me paying, nor are the text or email I received still in my records. I pay the bill and chalk it up to a senior moment on my part. Last week I got my one credit card bill. It says I never paid my last bill, so now I've got that bill to pay plus the interest. I find my previous bill open but with the invoice in place in my living room. Here's why I'm posting. I'm physically disabled and can't drive, and I always pay that credit card bill in person after they messed up my payment years ago. A family member always takes me to my credit union to pay that bill, and like me, he remembers us going down to pay the bill. They say I never paid. He and I even remember a conversation we had on the way to the credit union and going grocery shopping afterwards, but yet the bill is unpaid and the bill is in my possession still. I don't know what to say except that credit card unions can be tricksy little rats. We'll call them rats. In my area, there are apiaries. An old girlfriend and I were driving down a backcountry road exploring the area, and we both saw an old lady in dark clothes tending to a few beehives in an open field not far from the road, maybe 50 yards or so from the road. She was covered in bees. I slowed down, the bees covered the woman, and then the bees all flew away and the lady was gone. There was nowhere she could have vanished to or hid, and we both saw it happen. Answer: that was no little old lady tending that beehive, that was the pain from Metal Gear Solid 3. When I was 23, I went to a week's workshop with uni abroad to Barcelona. The workshop was based in an obscure part of the city, and I always thought I'd never be able to find that area again. Fast forward about 15 years, I score a job in Barcelona. Get off the plane, go to the hotel near my new office, and it's across from said workshop. I worked there for 3 years, and when that job ends, I move country again for about 5 years. About a month ago, I was invited to an interview for a job, which I'm now in the process for, and guess where the offices are? Yep, around the corner from the workshop that I thought I'd never find again. It's got me wondering if it's coincidence or should I just move to that area until I work out why the universe keeps sending me there. This is probably my favorite one so far. The universe just sending you back to a specific place, like in another country regularly, is just kind of cool.
Woke up one morning, went into the living room, and there was a pile of at least 100 maggots in the middle of the living room. Fat fuckers, too. No idea where they came from, or perhaps more disturbingly, what they had eaten to get that size.
Well, that would certainly freak me the hell out if it was the first thing I woke up to in the morning. Wife and I were driving out of Texas to come back home to Ohio. We stop at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Kind of a rundown little place. Wife goes in while I'm filling up. I finish and pay at the pump and decide to head in and use the restroom real quick. I walk out and the wife is at the checkout paying. Wall up and the guy just starts looking at me and then calls me out by my full name.
Lieutenant?
Yeah?
Your name is Lieutenant Drinks-A-Lot, right?
Yeah? Do we know each other?
Nope.
Then how do you know my name?
I don't know.
Wife and I look at each other and we both get the hell out of there. I don't have a common name. I had never been to that gas station, let alone that town in Texas, ever. Every time my wife and I think about it, we can't explain it. Now, I've never worked a register, but I think that maybe when he paid to fill it up, it may have come up with his name if he paid by card at the pump, so the dude just took a shot in the dark and was like, oh, this is that dude. I don't know how he'd know that he's a lieutenant unless I know that you can get different titles on your debit and credit cards and whatnot, so I don't know if lieutenant is an option that you can have or something. It's the most rational explanation I can come up with, that's for sure.
After a bath, I went to put clothes on, blacked out and woke up on the floor, sitting upright against the sink and dressed. I have no idea what happened. I didn't feel sore anywhere like if I had fallen over, and it was as if I sat on the floor and dressed myself while I was unconscious. Felt like 20 minutes had passed, even though the bathroom still had steam in it. Kinda just shrugged it off, but I'll still think about it.
You probably just got up too fast, you silly cow. I'm not the kind of person to have a great many friends, but those friends I do keep are sacred to me. So one evening, I'm getting out of a Rotterdam subway to go to my apartment near there when I see an old friend, one I haven't seen in the flesh in a few years, heading into the subway. I call out his name. He turns, waves, and makes this call me gesture. Then the doors close and subway rides off. 30 seconds later, my phone rings. It was my friend who told me he'd just seen me getting the normal train he'd used to get home from the bar. Apparently, I had grinned, waved, gestured, call me, the doors shut, and the train drove off. I lived in Rotterdam, he lived in Enschede. Well, looks like more doppelganger shenanigans are afoot. In high school, I remember going to English and the teacher did roll call. She called my name and I raised my hand and said, I'm here. Then she stopped, saying, so he's not here then. My friend and I laughed because I was obviously here. Figured she was messing with me. That night, my mom got a call telling her I wasn't at class today. I was actually marked as absent. I go back to school the next day and tell my friend, Mrs. English teacher actually freaking counted me as absent. And he said, why wouldn't she? Thought to myself, you're not funny. But I just let it slide because I thought again I was being messed with. Then one of my friends sits down and asks, you feeling better today? Or were you just playing hooky? I was so confused. Then I go to my first hour and that teacher hands me the work I supposedly missed from that day. I looked in my bag and had the same stuff, guide and assignments already there. To this day. I don't know if I missed that day of school or not. I like to think that the teacher and the students, your friends, were conspiring against you to mess with you really badly. About a couple years ago, a friend sent me a video and he asked if I had a lost twin somewhere. It was a video made by amateur actors from the city I used to live in. There was this girl that looks just like me. She talked just like me and her part on the sketch consisted of telling a joke I used to tell at the time. I was freaked out of my mind. For some stupid reason I deleted that video and I haven't been able to find it anywhere. And God knows I spent an embarrassing number of hours trying to confirm it even existed in the first place. I kept this one in just as an example of a stupid one that I absolutely don't believe. And believe me, there are already a few that I'm like, very skeptical of, but some of them are pretty cool. Senior year of high school, 30-minute lunch. My buddy and I drove all the way from my school to McDonald's, normally about a 10-minute drive, so 20 minutes minimum there and back. But we stopped by my house in between the school and McDonald's. I grab a shirt, change, leave, drive down the street, get into an altercation with a guy who we flipped off for tailgating. A shooty bang bang is pulled. We think he was across the street. Looked like a shooty bang bang, but who knows? His wife in the passenger seat starts yelling at him. We part ways. Go to McDonald's and order food, eat in the parking lot, decide we are late regardless. We had no access to the time in my car and our phones were in our lockers at school. We also were frequent ditchies or tardy kids. Turns out this all occurred in 18 minutes on the dot. It's freaking impossible, but it happened. My buddy and I still talk about it to this day, saying we went through a wormhole or some crap. Or my Nissan, rest in peace, somehow could time travel or slow down time. Time-traveling Nissan is not nearly as cool as a time-traveling DeLorean. I was at a gas station getting a coffee. I absolutely love gas station coffee, and this was somewhere I always stop before heading to work. I went to pay for my coffee and I tap my card. The lady at the till tells me it was declined. I try inserting it with my PIN because maybe my tap wasn't working. The lady said it was declined again. There was no one else in the gas station at that time, so I'm like, hold up, let me check my online banking. Because I'd just gotten paid and I knew I had money. I go to my online banking and it says that I paid. I show her the transaction and she starts insisting that it didn't go through on her end. Like, okay lady, I'm not paying for the same coffee twice. Next day, I go in to grab another coffee and the lady tells me that I stole the coffee the other night, but doesn't make me pay for it. I am angry because I just got a lecture when I know the money for the coffee came out of my account. I check my online banking later and there was no transaction for the coffee. Not so much a glitch in reality as it is a glitch in your bank account.
biking back from school one day with a friend and we were talking when suddenly I got a really strange case of deja vu. I remembered the exact moment as if it had happened once before and knew what he was going to say next. Then he said it. Nothing mind-blowing, but more than 14 years later, I still can't explain it. See, I would explain that by saying that the friend was probably talking about something that you were only passively listening to before, but now that you were actually focused and subconsciously aware of what they were talking about before, you kind of knew what they were going to say next. This happened to me several years ago while I was living in California and working a great job in a downtown coffee house. I loved everything about that job. I worked with fantastic people and our shop was located in the city's historic district in a very old, very beautiful building that had once been a hotel in the 1800s, but had since been converted into apartments, lofts, and of course, the big coffee house on the main floor. Being an early birdie and living only a couple blocks away from the coffee house, I was always scheduled to work the opening shift, which started at 4:15 a.m. It was the most unpopular shift, but it happened to be my absolute favorite one because I loved walking to work in the quiet of the early mornings as the rest of the city was sound asleep. Normally, downtown was quite loud and busy, full of people and constant activity, but in the early hours of the morning, it was still and silent, and I felt as if I was the only person in existence walking through a ghost town. Every day, I arrived 10 or 15 minutes early for my shift and would wait for my manager on the patio outside of the shop. It was always just the two of us working that early shift, and my manager was often running a little bit behind and never arrived before I did. But I didn't mind at all. I liked to spend some time by myself on the patio outside of the darkened shop, gathering my thoughts while I waited for him to walk up with his keys to unlock the door. One morning as I was walking to work and approaching our building, I noticed that the coffee house was brightly lit up as all the lights were already turned on and shining through the store's giant glass windows. I was about 10 minutes early that morning, so I was very surprised to see that my manager had arrived before me and had already started opening up the shop. I walked up to the glass door and pulled on the handle to let myself in, only to find that it was locked shut. That wasn't really unusual, as we often kept the doors of the employee entrance and main entrance locked while we got everything ready for the day and went through our morning procedures until 5 a.m., which was our official opening time. What was unusual, though, was the sound of music I could clearly hear drifting through the speakers inside the store. This was during the holiday season, so we were playing Christmas music throughout the day, but on this particular morning, I could hear the Christmas music already playing its familiar loop at a rather high volume inside the store. This was during the holiday season, so we were playing Christmas music throughout the day, but we never turned it on until around 9 or so in the morning, out of respect for all of the tenants living in the apartment above us. But on this particular morning, I could hear the Christmas music already playing its familiar loop at a rather high volume inside the store. I thought it was odd, but decided that maybe my manager was just feeling extra festive that day and wanted to listen to some tunes while we worked. I knocked on the employee's entrance door and waited for my manager to come and let me in. I looked through the glass and watched for him. He didn't come, so I knocked again and waited some more. He still didn't appear, so I knocked again and again. I then walked to the main entrance door and tried knocking on those with no luck. I checked my watch and saw that I had 5 minutes until I needed to clock in. I knocked again, much louder this time, and looked inside through the glass door for any signs of my manager. And that's when I heard the muffled sound of voices coming from the back of the store where the kitchen of our coffee shop was located. At that quiet, early hour in the morning, every sound seems to be amplified, and what I could distinctly hear was two male voices talking and laughing together. That was very unusual, as I had mentioned before, that it was normally just me and my manager who opened up the shop. But I figured someone had probably just needed to pick up an extra shift. I knocked yet again and continued to listen to the sounds coming from the coffee shop. The men kept talking and laughing, loudly. They seemed to be having a really great time. In addition to the music and the talking and the laughter, I began to hear the sound of clanging dishes and also the sprayer of the 3-compartment steel kitchen sink being turned on and off, which was very, very unusual, as there would be no dishes to wash before the store had even opened. I was also confused as to why the manager and whoever was with him were in the kitchen in the back of the store, because so much of our opening procedures, setting up the pastry cases, brewing the coffee, preparing everything for the espresso machine, were done at the front of the store, where I was waiting to be let inside. At this point, I was getting a bit irritated, as I was supposed to start work in just a few minutes, and I needed to punch in on our time clock. I hated clocking in late for work. I dug out my phone and dialed my manager's cell number. He didn't pick up, so I dialed the number to our coffee shop shop instead, and the 2 phones inside the shop, one in the back office and one up the front by the register, started ringing. Once, twice, 3 rings and no answer. Now 4 rings and 5. I hung up and I immediately dialed again, annoyed that they were making such a racket in there with the music and all the talking and the laughter that they probably couldn't even hear the phone at all. Just as before, nobody answered. I hung up and redialed the store for a 3rd time. The phone rang and went unanswered, and so I banged on the door yet again to no avail. I looked at my watch, and I was officially late for work. As I was standing in the front of the locked door with my phone against my ear, becoming more and more irritated, I noticed a pair of headlights reflecting in the glass rolling up behind me. I turned around and saw something I did not expect at all. It was my manager.
I'm sorry I'm late,
he said as he climbed out of the driver's seat and shut his car door and hustled up to the shop's entrance.
I tried to get here as fast as I could,
he said as he moved towards me and fumbled with his keys trying to find the one to the shop door.
You're mad,
he said.
I can tell. I'm really sorry.
Completely confused, I put my phone away and turned to head into the store with him, and that's when I lost my breath for a minute. The coffee shop was totally dark. None of the lights were on, not a single light, and it was dead quiet. The Christmas music had stopped, and so had the voices and laughter. All of the loud noise had disappeared. Every sound I had been listening to just seconds before had suddenly vanished.
I promise I'll be here on time tomorrow,
my manager said as he fits his key into the lock.
I'll even be early. You'll be shocked.
Little did he know that I could not possibly be more shocked to see him than I was at that very moment, as he opened the door to the silent, completely empty coffee house. Perhaps another individual with a deep love for creative writing.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.